We all have a story to tell. Beautiful, complex, fascinating stories. Told through a lens of varying shades and experiences. That's the power of representation. Diverse creatives cannot be defined or confined. So let your creativity soar. Fill the page, press record, and dare to captivate the masses with your authentic voice. We all have a story to tell. What's yours? Hollywood Creative Forum, where every story is told.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the host of the 2021 Hollywood Creative Forum, TV host and producer, Dana Blair.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 Hollywood Creative Forum. As they just said, I am Dana Blair, and I am beyond excited to be here with you. For those of you that are new, the Hollywood Creative Forum is an annual professional development and networking event produced by the Walter Cates Foundation. This space, in real life or virtually, is authentic, transparent, empowering, and inspirational. This event has been designed to connect content creators who represent diverse cultural and ethnic communities with studio development executives. Television, film and streaming writers, directors, producers, and showrunners benefit from a high level of engagement with studio executives who are positioned to use their knowledge and resources to advance real, inclusive storytelling in the entertainment industry. For those of you that are familiar with the forum and have attended in previous years, yes, things do look a little bit different this time around, but it's okay. The mission is still the same. We also have a few updates and surprises to share with you over the next few days, as well as throughout the day, so make sure you stick around. I've worked in media nearly 15 years. The first 10 as a marketer focused on branded content and integrated strategy in cable TV and publishing. Then I transitioned, which is a really long story, to in front of camera as a journalist and producer. To some, these seem like very different careers, but the reality is that both of these paths challenge me each and every day to ask, what is the hook? What is the difference here? What is the story that has not yet been told? And why does the world need to know? How do we shine a spotlight on the untold? It is questions such as these that bring me here today. It is the Hollywood Creative Forum and the Walter Cates Foundation's commitment to telling every story that made me want to be a part of this event in a more meaningful way. This year, we will explore the theme of stories from the diaspora and focus on the broad narratives of storytelling by diverse communities, both in America and across the globe. It is a place where every story can be told and heard. No one culture is monolithic. No single story or journey has simply one layer. We will explore those narratives in various ways over the next 2 days. Additionally, our featured speakers, guests, and panelists will peel back the layers on impactful storytelling and get that story in front of the right decision makers, influencers, and distributors in the entertainment industry. Today, we will hear powerful insights for writing your breakthrough script with writer, executive, and diversity thought leader Kelly Edwards. Plus, Paula Madison, Chairman and CEO, Madison Media Management, LLC, and Principal Owner, The Africa Channel, will share the power of broadening our perception of racial identity through unique storytelling. Entertainment executive, TV producer, entrepreneur, and all-around creative powerhouse and president of Planet DMA, will share insights on the organic pathway for pitching and selling original content. And we will have a special dialogue, the likes of which you can only find here, exploring the current state of Native Americans in entertainment, led by Director of Strategy, Native American Media Alliance, and CEO of Barsid Foundation, Ian Scorden. Coming up a bit later on, we have the forum's inaugural film screening of a very moving documentary by award-winning director Michelle Stevenson. Stateless follows the families of those affected by the Dominican Republic's 2013 legislation stripping citizenship from Dominicans of Haitian descent. The film uncovers the complex history and present-day politics of Haiti and Dominican Republic through the grassroots electoral campaign of a young attorney named Rosa Iris. Following the screening, there will be a curated discussion with editor-in-chief of the Haitian Times, Vanya Andre, and there will also be an opportunity for you to get involved in the conversation and ask questions. That was my spiel. That was a lot, but I told you today was going to be good. Now is the time of disruption. Here is where we do the groundwork. I encourage each and every one of you out there to take copious notes, write down some of the gems that will be dropped, names of participants, connect in the chats, and attend our networking experience at the end of tomorrow, day 2. We are a community. Connecting consistently is a part of the work as well. Thank you again for logging on from your desks, offices, kitchen tables, beds, and workspaces that you don't want your bosses or any of your colleagues to know about. We won't tell on you. I have a couple of housekeeping notes. Please share your gems and favorite moments from today and throughout the rest of tomorrow using hashtag HCF2021 or hashtag Hollywood Creative Forum. Plus, keep your eyes peeled in your inboxes for our end of day survey. This will help us as we plan future events. Select panels will invite for Q&A. There's a Q&A function down there towards the bottom of your screen. Don't worry, I'll let you know when that happens, but that's where you will drop all of your questions for our panelists and guest speakers. And last but not least, there's still time to register for the networking event that will be taking place at the end of day 2. Once you register to attend this event, you should have received an exclusive invite via a separate email. That will take place via a separate link. So go back and check through your inboxes. It may have ended up in your spam, but be sure to register so that you can participate in that event tomorrow. You must respond to the invitation so that you can receive your separate login. Our networking host, television executive DMA, will facilitate our first foray into Zoom breakout rooms. While it's not the same as in-person networking per se, this virtual experience will give creatives and executives an opportunity to meet and engage directly with each other. Now, please help me give a very, very warm welcome to Executive Director of the Walter Cates Foundation, Michelle Ray.
Thank you, Dana, for the warm introduction and for serving as our host for our first virtual Hollywood Creative Forum. For those of you who are not aware, the Walter Cates Foundation is a 40-year-old nonprofit foundation dedicated to advocacy around diversity, equity, and inclusion in media and entertainment. The foundation provides resources and significant funding to key organizations that support vital programs and initiatives that furthers diversity's impact in our industry. So now on to today. While everyone enjoys a good narrative, the Hollywood Creative Forum is about more than storytelling. While we do the important work of providing a platform for communities that have been voiceless, marginalized, or resigned to stereotypical characters and storylines, there is a greater purpose for this event. The purpose is to create access, resources, opportunities, and even connections for diverse creatives and content creators to tell their own unique stories. As an industry, we know there's a business side to Hollywood. And it is for this reason that if we are able to create a more inclusive entertainment landscape, it then becomes more important than ever that we showcase diverse writers, directors, showrunners, both here in the US and around the world, who all have global perspectives and lived experiences that reflect their diverse and often intersectional stories. We hope through this event that you can gain knowledge on how to navigate the business of Hollywood, from securing a space in the writer's room, frankly, to understanding how best to navigate the content pipeline. And for every aspirational tagline and ambitious mission statement about overcoming the barriers and the processes that historically have made it daunting for First Nation people, Black, Latinx, differently abled people, and other opportunity challenged communities to be themselves, to see themselves, and own their own identities and narratives, there is a corresponding call to action for the leaders and allies within our vast networks and studios to commit to doing this work. And as a collective society and frankly, an industry, we still have much work ahead of us. And if we're going to make sure that every story is being told, we have to make sure we make space for these stories. That is why we are here. And that is why the Walter Cates Foundation curates this event. It is why we decided in our 10th iteration of the forum to bring you a virtual experience rather than sitting on the sidelines and waiting for travel and in-person events to return to normal. The truth is that we really have a lot of work to do and no time to waste. The forum is one example of how the foundation advocates for diversity, equity, inclusion, and even belonging across media and entertainment. And as we occupy our unique position at the intersection of diversity, inclusion, culture, innovation, we along with this creative community, work within an industry that can only be described as the original influencers of thought leadership, advocacy, resources, conversations, and opportunities. We exemplify what it looks like to be an environment where there's a place for everyone to bring their talents, experiences, and ideas to contribute to the collective success of our industry. As a Jamaican-born, Canadian-educated, Black, South Asian, Western European, trilingual woman living in the United States, I am living and breathing as an example of our focus on intersectional diversity and, of course, this year's theme, stories from the diaspora. In one way or another, all of us have some diasporic aspect of our experiences and identities. We are, after all, people who check more than one box. And the increasing awareness of this fact has given rise to the terms like third culture and intersectional diversity. But as we expand our lens, we challenge you to see yourselves and each other a little differently, more fully, and maybe even more compassionately. No matter what we look like on the surface, all of us want to be seen and to be heard, and our unique experiences and cultures are all part of the mosaic of our collective and individual histories, humanity, ideas, and identities. So once again, I welcome you to the Hollywood Creative Forum, a place where every story is told and hopefully is heard. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome my colleague, friend, television executive, and co-creator of the Hollywood Creative Forum, president of Planet DMA, the one and only DMA.
Michelle, happy anniversary, my friend. Happy 10th. Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
Everyone, from our very first planning dinner, the Hollywood Creative Forum has enjoyed a very specific distinction in this space. And that is, we have focused solely and obsessively on the intended outcome of the event, constantly increasing the number of diverse working professionals in the entertainment industry. And that outcome orientation means that we've been steadily adapting HCF every single year to respond to the latest changes in Hollywood and to continue having impact. And this year is no different, but I want to talk briefly about what has stayed the same. Over all of these years, I really just want to speak up and highlight the years of partnership and championship from this industry's incredible talent executives in diversity, equity, and inclusion, who have been leading the strategies at networks and studios, connecting talent to gigs, and speaking so honestly and so powerfully in this space for decades, and too often going unrecognized as they continue to define and lead this work. So just a hats off to those wonderful creative talent execs across the industry. And Michelle, think of how much has changed since we were literally orchestrating those first hand matches of working professionals to the network and studio and production company hirers they were going to do one-on-ones with the next day. The folks who were looking for them that we were going to just hand introduce, and how powerful that was, versus an industry now that has as many databases for you to get your information into as probably there's talent out there. Now we're seeing social media as this powerhouse where independent creators have a voice and then can be connected straight into this trusted path for broadcast, for cable, for streaming opportunities. And the 24/7 platforms that broadcast, cable, and streaming have created have generated such a volume of demand for content that it no longer is or can be gated for just a specific few. There's worldwide demand for news stories, for real stories, for more and more stories, everyone for your stories. And over the next couple of days, as ever, we're going to talk to you about the organic pipelines for connecting to those opportunities, the best practices for accessing them in today's industry, and how to craft the excellent content that this industry is actively seeking and worldwide audiences are actively embracing. We cannot wait to get started. So please, Dana, let me turn everything back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so very, very much. I'm excited. Thank you, DMA. Thank you so much, Michelle. I told you, get your pens and paper ready. I'm motivated. I'm ready to get this party started. So here we go. The entertainment industry depends on new voices with new ideas to deliver content, but writing that breakthrough script that gets you noticed in Hollywood is never as easy as it looks. Founder and CEO of EBIS Communications, Mary Ann Howland, will sit with former television executive turned writer Kelly Edwards to share invaluable insights from the gatekeeper's POV to finding the one idea that will set you apart from the rest. Really excited for this conversation. Everyone, please help me welcome, for writing your breakthrough script, the one and only Mary Ann Howland.
Thank you, Dana. And thank you, DMA, for that wonderful perspective of the work that we've been doing for so many years. I remember being there from the very beginning with you guys. And good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, wherever you may be watching from across the diaspora. I'm joined here with the brand newly minted author, Kelly Edwards. Kelly is a veteran producer and creative executive who has worked with every major studio in Hollywood. She was mentored by legendary director Gary Marshall at Disney and famed producer Laura Ziskin at Sony. And Edwards eventually shifted her focus to television, where she served as a comedy executive at Fox and headed up UPN's comedy division. After producing a drama series for Paramount, she moved on to NBC Universal, where she oversaw diversity for their 20 networks. Kelly spent her final stint as an executive creating HBO and Warner Media Entertainment's emerging artists programs. And along the way, she also produced a Christmas movie for Hallmark, as if she wasn't busy enough already. Kelly holds a BA in theater from Vassar and an MFA in screenwriting from Emerson College. She's been a Sundance Erotic Lab Fellow and was recently staffed on the new Fox drama, Our Kind of People. And her new book is The Executive Chair, a writer's guide to TV series development, which will be released soon. I think it's October 5th, somewhere soon.
October 5th, yeah.
I've had a chance to read it, and it's really straightforward. It's very easy to read, filled with insider tips, and as Dana said, dropping gems that Kelly has gained from her illustrious career in the entertainment industry. And I'm so excited to see you again, Miss Kelly. We met 8 years ago at the Hollywood Creative Forum. I still have notes from that interview.
It's been that long.
And you were VP of Talent Development at HBO in a diversity role then. So
That's right.
Let's start with talking about the journey that you've been on from your point of view as an executive who's had a history and an experience in so many different roles that give you this 360-degree view of what the business is. Can you talk about those roles and how they brought you to your arrival of here today? What's going on with you now?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say thank you to the Hollywood Creative Forum for inviting me back, because I have been here many, many, many times as an executive on those panels, and to be coming back sort of on the other side of it on the creative side has been just an amazing transformation for me. And I also am really excited that you're giving away some books. So I cannot wait for people to read it. I hope it is of value to them. This journey is very much a 360 in a lot of ways, because I actually started when I got out of college as a casting assistant. I actually worked for a manager, then a casting assistant. I was a casting assistant, and then I was a writer's assistant. So I've sort of made this gigantic loop back into one of the first goals that I had, which was to write for television. And along the way, I found myself taking some really interesting paths to get there. So I did, and you sort of gave my bio already, but what it sort of brought me to was I was looking for, really who was making the decisions about what the content that was being made, who was making those decisions. And so I sort of followed this interesting path of following the writers and following the content itself. So after being a writer's assistant, I was able to move into features, and I had got my first job working for as a story editor, working for Laura Ziskin and for Gary Marshall. I was also reading scripts for New Line, so I was developing my ability to assess material. I moved on to working in television, and so I got that piece of it as well, which was really beneficial because I've worked my whole career now on the TV side. So I feel like I learned how to put together a show, what those components were, how to work with talent, all the things that you sort of need in order to really be an effective executive. And then I was able to run my own division and then make some decisions about the kind of material that I was going to bring in. And then I wanted to learn how to produce, and I felt like that was going to give me career longevity, because there's only so many years that you can go as an executive on the buying side before somebody eventually fires you. There's always a buyout or something that sort of makes your career, take a left turn. So I really wanted to make sure that I had some other tools in my toolkit, and producing was a great way for me to learn how to sell, which was incredibly important. And I use those tools today. And then going to NBC, I really worked on, it was sort of giving me another vantage point, which was I was really working side by side with HR. I was learning about the recruiting side of things. In addition to that, I was working in a corporate environment. So my job was really much more functional, but I also had to stretch myself, which meant I was giving more big picture brainstorming workouts. I was working with a lot of the ERGs and the affinity groups. I was giving very big speeches and moderating panels. And so I had to learn how to build those skills that I never really had before. And it gave me, I think, a comfort in a lot of areas that I didn't have prior. And then going back into the working for HBO, I was able to sort of get back into working with those artists in emerging artist programs. And I love that. And that sort of led me to finally exposing the work that I'd been doing for the last 30 years on my own, which was I had always been writing, and I had always been taking classes, either at the Groundlings or improv or writing classes. And my goal had been to make sure that I was up on how to speak to writers. But in the meantime, I also developed myself as a writer. So when I was at HBO, I decided, well, let me go back and get my graduate degree, which I did. And along the way, while I was doing that, they always encourage you to apply to competitions. And so I applied to a couple of competitions, and I applied to Sundance and got in. And let me tell you, that moment that I got in, and they said, oh, we're going to do a press release. And I had a nervous breakdown because I thought, oh no, now everyone's going to know my secret, and everyone's going to know my passion is actually writing. And is that a conflict? And I was a little worried about that. But ultimately, everybody that I spoke to said, you can still help people get to the next level in their writing. You're just going to probably do it from a different vantage point. So that was sort of the whole Megillah on how I ended up here. It's been a crazy ride. I was approached right after I got my deal at HBO, maybe a week after I physically left HBO as an executive, by a publishing company that asked me to write a book. And my first reaction was, well, there've got to be thousands of books about this topic in the way that I'm going to talk about it. And they said, no, there's actually nothing about it. Development from the executive point of view. So we want to crack open, what do you guys think? And how do you think? And, can you give us some insider tips? And so that's the book that I wrote.
And so, and I told you should be careful when you tell that story, because when a writer hears, oh, you got a book deal, just like that, and you know how hard it is, how many people struggle trying to get that first book deal, and somebody just comes up to you and goes, oh, you should write a book, and next thing you know, there's a deal. So that's just not even fair. But anyway, so one of the things about you having had the opportunity to have so many roles in the entertainment industry to give you this broad perspective, one of the other things about you is you always have been really generous about providing information and support for folks just wanting to get in the industry. And so, so as it relates to your book, which is, if you could talk about who's the book for, and what do you hope that people learn from it?
Well, I originally thought the book was for the emerging artists, and I still think it's primarily for the emerging artists. It's for people who want to get into Hollywood, but who don't always have insight into how to do it and how to do it effectively. There's a lot of protocol that goes on in Hollywood that people don't let the outsiders know about. And I think my goal was to break down the barriers. My parents, I grew up in Beverly Hills, but my parents were dentists. They were in the dental field. They were not connected in any way. And I had to find my way in. And once I got in, I realized that every single job that I've ever had has been a hookup from a friend. And so knowing how important your network is critical. But that's something that people sort of talk about in general. They go, well, it's not what you know, it's who you know, but they don't really tell you the specifics about why that is and how do you create that network. So I wanted to make sure that we sort of open the doors to everyone who wants to be in, because we need more material. We need great perspectives. I'm tired of seeing the same movie done 50,000 times. So I would love it if more people came in. There's just going to be better churn and more interesting content coming out. I thought that's my book was really for anybody sort of on the entry level. What I found when I started to send it out to people to get either their blurbs or their feedback, I found that everybody came back and they went, "Oh, I didn't know that." And so Jay Roach did my forward, and his forward is just so lovely because it's like if he'd had the book, he wouldn't have made some mistakes in his early career. And I just thought, well, that's so wonderful. Yvette Lee Bowser said the same thing. So I feel like it really is for everybody. And I think the primary message of this book too is that we are not the executives. Let me just say executives, because I do wear two hats. Executives aren't the enemy. We don't try to be terrible. We don't try to give bad notes. We don't try to be to derail projects. We come to entertainment just the same way that everybody else does, which is we love content. We watch those movies just like everybody else did. We're excited by television. We are, rabid fans of literature, and we read every script, and we're sort of, we're in the trenches with you. We're just on a different side. And I'm sure that not everybody feels that way, because sometimes when you're getting a note, you kind of feel, I don't know, you feel attacked, but it's not on purpose. So it's trying to demystify the executive ranks, to try to give some insight into what we do and how we do and why we do it, but also just to give everyone the cheat sheet about, this is how to make your career a little bit easier. This is how to maybe go from 0 to 60 a little bit faster, a little bit farther.
So sticking with that part of your journey and how to avoid the mistakes, or how to leverage your networks. So what is the toughest lesson that you learned in your career, and that is in the book?
Well, I would say not to take things too personally. That was the toughest lesson, because everything feels personal. When you don't get a project bought, or you don't get the meeting, or someone cancels lunch on you 15 times, it feels like a personal affront. And what I try to explain in the book is that it's not personal. Executives are moving really, really fast. We're moving at a clip. I would get upwards of 200 plus emails a day. That's just emails. That's not including calls. It's not including texts. It's not including the material that I have to read just to keep up with the workload. So if you think about the fact that an executive they probably have about 30 meetings a week, give or take, or they're meeting 30 people a week. Some of those people that they knew before, some of these people they're having lunch with, there's a whole, it runs the gamut of the kinds of interactions that they're going to have every week. Plus it's an inbox and it's a phone sheet. And then they're trying to have a life after work, which almost never happens. You're always working on the weekends. We just don't necessarily have time to respond to everything, or to tell you when we loved your script or we hated your script, or if we sent your script on to somebody else that we think is going to do something for your career. There were tons of times where people would send me something and I would just pass it along. And I would go, you know what, this person needs to know X person. Let me just pass along that material. And eventually something either would happen or wouldn't. But because I didn't have the time to then go back to you and say, this is what I did, it feels like I didn't do anything. So it's trying to not take that silence, that deathly silence, too personally, because the industry does work on a number of levels. It's working on the actual, what you see, what you feel, what you hear, but then there's an undercurrent of you're being talked about. People are moving your material forward. They're sharing it. And so there's multiple things happening. You just don't always know it. And it feels personal when you don't hear back. And I had to take that and really internalize that and realize that, oh, maybe I should have followed up with them more often, because I would have had a better relationship with X, Y, or Z person. But because I felt like it was an affront to me because they weren't calling me back when I thought they should call me back, I probably let those relationships go.
Wow,
That
that could be applicable for almost any field that you're in. Learning that careful balance of learning not to take things too personal, but
right.
But there's got to be balance, because and my next question is asking you about how to get to that perfect script, which you described as something that is very personal. So can you talk a little bit about that, how to get to that one idea that sets you apart, that is your personal experience, and then the balance of not trying to take this whole, process that you're going through personally.
Right. It can make you insane, right? So I worked all through my career, obviously, with very skilled and very junior people. And working at HBO, when we would bring in, our new crop of writers, it didn't matter if they had just rolled out of college or if they had been, batting around the system for a while. We actually had a couple of folks who did just roll out of college or who were in college when they got in. So it doesn't have to anything to do with, sort of age or, and sometimes not even skill. Sometimes skill is sort of a secondary. What we were always looking for, though, was how personal is this material to you? And I'm going to go really deep because I feel this is important for people to understand. One of the big mistakes that I find when people are writing material and sending it in is that they get really enamored of concept and not of character. When you get caught up in concept, your ideas seem very surfacey. They don't really grab us. They might be cool, they might be twisty, they might be, fun and exciting. It might be Die Hard on a whatever. But really what we come back for, what we want to see on the page, is who you are and what you're bringing authentically to this material. And the more I say you can bleed on the page, the more that character is you, the more those situations are of you and about you, the more it will pop and resonate for us, particularly when you're emerging into the field. Now, you can always write something where it takes place on a spaceship or, under the ocean. And those are things that you won't necessarily have experienced. So in the Write What You Know, you can't be literal about Write What You Know. However, you could still write that big breakthrough script that might have that sort of setting, so long as the character is really experiencing something really emotional. Now, how do you get there? That's the key. The key is that you have to dig deep with your art. So I can tell when I write a script, I can tell if I'm not connecting with it. And then I always look at, well, how do I find something in that character that I can really relate to? And then write about that. So I try to emotionally, I do this deep dive on, well, how do I intersect with that character? So I'll give you an example. I wrote a script that I did it. Actually, it was my one of my thesis scripts for Emerson, and it's a high concept idea. It's essentially Atomic Blonde meets Bridesmaids. So it's a badass government operative who's on the run, who ends up sort of hiding out in her sister's wedding, and she's terrible at personal relationships, and so she's now being asked to be a bridesmaid and participate in girly events and to have friends and to reconnect with her sister she's been estranged from for years. And I've never been a CIA operative. I did consult with one, but I've never been in that situation. I watched every Bond movie, every Bourne movie, every Taken. So I love that genre. And I always kept coming back to those people must be psychopaths because they behave in a way that's not normal. And yet we're expected to believe that they actually have normal relationships. And what I did was I then took that relationship of the two sisters at the center and I said, well, you know, this is actually a chance for me to do a do-over with my sister who passed away before my daughter was born. I never had the chance to reconcile with my sister. And so I put every ounce of emotion and relationship and all the things that I wanted to say to her in that script between those two sisters. That script has gotten me so far. I've gotten ridiculous like feature meetings with people that I would never have expected because they come back to that relationship. Yes, there's, you know, people getting killed on the top of it, but they come back for the relationship. And there's an authenticity to that relationship that they are drawn to. And you can do it, a writer can do it, anybody can do it, but they have to really dig deep into the messiness of life and the messiness of your personal baggage. So I think that's the thing that's really important. When at HBO, we never really looked at structure, because structure can be taught. What can't be taught is all of the juicy goodness that's inside of your body that's screaming to get out. So if you feel really strongly about something, put that into your character. If you have a relationship that you want to delve into, put that into your character, you know, and then make that character operate out of that want, that need. That's how you should proceed, not looking at the plot points. That help?
Oh, that was,
Hopefully
thank
that
you for going deep on that. That was phenomenal. And I think the reason why Michelle might have asked me to have this conversation with you is because I'm a recent author that wrote my own first book, Warrior Rising, which is about my son and who has a disability. And it's about the journey that we've been on raising him. And to your exact point, I remember turning in my first manuscript and my editor at Penguin just sent it right back and went, oh, no, girl, you got to go deep, and gave me extended time. And so while writing it, there were moments where I'm crying and I really, you know, relived the experiences and wrote from my heart. And that made all the difference in the world. So I totally, you know, appreciate that process. But since I've been through that process, and I know the editing part is really part that's most challenging to making decisions about what stays in and what goes to the cutting room floor. So thinking about your own book, so tell us what chapters hit the cutting room floor for you that you're maybe put in your next book.
Yeah, I had to make some hard decisions because the title is The Executive Chair. It's from the executive point of view. There is probably another whole book on the things that I left out, which is, you know, crafting really great log lines, which I find people sometimes have a really hard time with because they want to summarize the book as opposed to, you know, you're supposed to sell the book. I left out chapters on drama and comedy that I had written, you know, delving into developing specifically the drama and developing the comedy pitches in particular, but also in the scripts. And I kind of felt like I left some of those things out because they weren't necessarily from the executive point of view. They were more from the writer point of view. And I wanted to stay primarily on task, even though I do delve into your mission statement and, you know, and to stay in your lane. So I do delve into some things, but it's really how it impacts your conversation with an executive. So I do think there are probably more things that we can get into in the future. I think I also didn't get into how to get into a program, which I think is a whole other chapter. There are tips and tricks on how to get into programs and why programs are important and how they became important. I didn't get into diversity, which I think I did have chapters on that. And so I think those are all things that over time too, if I don't write a book, I will post on my website. I'm going to post I'm writing a novel now, so I'm going to post that process because I think that's interesting, just to sort of get into the headspace of, creating content in different ways.
So we have so much more to look forward to from you. I'm excited about that.
I
And
hope so.
so I remember back to 2013 when we were at the Hollywood Creative Forum, and I remember you talking to the room about, all those aspiring creatives. You talked to them about our power, and you talked about how our Black stories, about our Black experience, create jobs in the industry, and you talked about how our stories can create wealth. So, and I love that conversation, thinking about, how much, especially in this moment, how many stories we have to tell that have not been told yet, and the casting. And well, I'll let you kind of talk about what it means in terms of getting our stories out into the audiences that are hungry for these.
Well, I think this is like a multi-pronged, I think we only have a couple of minutes, but it's a multi-pronged conversation. I think I might have talked to you about the fact that, people of color need to be supported better by the industry. The one thing that I've been sort of standing on a soapbox for, and I wrote this piece recently about it, which is the fact that when you look at the number of overall deals that a person of color, or the percentage of overall deals for people of color versus their white counterparts, they are minuscule. And yet those overall deals go to supporting not only a staff, but also the ability to develop multiple projects at a time. When you are one person, a solo person, you only have one show that you can do at a time. You only have so many pitches that you can take out at a time. When you have an overall deal that's got plenty of money behind it, you can build a staff and then go and generate more IP. When you create your own IP, it's generating income for the rest of your life. So you sell that piece of IP, that book or that script or whatever, that's going to then generate generate income for you every time that show is shown, every time that character gets spun off into something new, every time you write a song for a show that you have created, or you write a song for a show that is on the air, it gives you ASCAP royalties. You have the ability to just sort of expand your income. And I do think that we need to make sure that we are getting in those rooms and pitching and getting those show opportunities, getting those films made, because that is how you're going to create some generational wealth within this industry. If you think about Stephen King wrote books, and then he sold all those books, and they become TV series, and they become film series, and then those characters branch off and become other things, and he's still making money off of everything that he's done before right now, which is incredible. We want that for our people. We want to be able to do that. Sometimes, though, it is not as easy to go to the head of the class. You can't always go from, hey, I want to write something and then I'm selling it. Sometimes you go in through the writer's room, you work your way up, you become that showrunner that then can sell that show. You're not giving away your percentage of something to someone else who's going to manage you. So sometimes getting in through that doorway is important, but you can also do it by writing your book and writing a graphic novel. You can make your own web series, look at Issa Rae. So you can build your wealth, but you need to create that material. So I say, when you writers are out there and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do for your weekend, instead of going out and playing basketball or playing cards or going to see you got to see movies. So I'm going to say, go see a movie. But you need to be writing constantly. And I get up at 4:00 in the morning and I write for 4 hours before the rest of the house wakes up. And that's how I've been able to go to school, had a full-time job, eventually got into Sundance, now have a deal, because I'm constantly working my craft. And I think that separates those who make it and move forward and those who want to move forward but don't necessarily cross the finish line. So keep going. That's my big mission, is to make sure that people keep going.
And to make sure that they buy your book, right?
And buy my book. Keep going and buy my book. It will give you insights. It will cut to the chase. There are great, I think, tips in there. I have a chapter on getting in, a chapter on getting your first job, a chapter on why we do lunch, a chapter on a whole piece on your mission statement and staying in your lane and why we need you to be in a lane in the beginning. There's all of that information is wrapped up in this book. Even tips and tricks about what we need to see in your pitch and your pilot story. So all of that is all the information that I've culled from 35 years in the industry, from writer's assistant through all of that. I'm putting in this book for you.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us this morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the diaspora. And now, back to Dana.
Thank you so much, Marianne, Kelly. That was a great conversation. I was taking copious notes. I'm like, character over concept, get to the point, stay in your lane. I'm over here. I'm ready to get that book. For those of you out there who are also hoping to get your fingers on the book a little bit early, we have a special update for you. Kelly's book, The Executive Chair, A Writer's Guide to TV Series Development, will be published in October. And we have 250 copies that we'll be giving away at random to those of you who are registered for this event. So make sure that you tell your friends to register too, and don't miss tomorrow because, we have a lot of fabulous things. So keep your eyes peeled for that email to see if you're one of those individuals that gets that book. All right, so let's keep this energy going. Next up, we have award-winning journalist and former television executive, Paula Madison. Paula embodies the essence of intersectionality and diversity. Known widely for her role as principal owner of the Africa Channel and for her personal crusade to tell the story of her Chinese ancestry from China to the Caribbean and back, Madison will share the power of broadening our perception of racial identity through unique storytelling. This is an opportunity for next-gen creatives, for all of us, to hear about the power of diasporic stories. Everyone, please welcome Chairman and CEO, Madison Media Management LLC, and principal owner of the Africa Channel, Paula Madison.
Thank you, Dana. It's such a pleasure to be with you all today. And I want to say that I so enjoyed the previous discussion because Kelly Edwards actually worked for me at NBC Universal. And it's great seeing her, even if I'm just seeing her in a little box, but I've been listening for about the past 20 minutes. And Kelly, if you can hear me, I miss you. It was great hearing your voice and hearing all your wisdom again. So thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm here to talk to you today from the perspective of being African American and also Chinese American and also Jamaican American and also Blasian. I'm here to speak to you from the perspective of how in telling stories that are about us as a people, that those stories encompass more of a totality of who we are. You know, we are really global citizens, and it's very, very important, I think, for us to perceive ourselves as such, especially when living in a time where our home nation, United States, seems to be going through a push-pull, a tug over just how much we are members of the history and the society of the United States. I too wrote a book that was published back in 2014. And I spent years as a journalist, as a newspaper and television executive. And I had decided, frankly, when I was 6 years old, that I was going to stop working at some point in order to find my Chinese grandfather or my Chinese grandfather's descendants. I hadn't really known where to find them, but my mother, who in a very low-tech way, I will show you. This is my book, Finding Samuel Lowe. And here is a photo, look closely, of my mother, who her mother was African Jamaican and her father was Chinese. And he left China in 1905 as a 15-year-old and journeyed to Jamaica, where he intended to make enough money to send back to China, which was suffering from some economic hardship. When my mother told us, my two older brothers and me, stories about our family, keep in mind that my mother, who looked Chinese, mixed race as she was, but she looked Chinese and had a heavy Jamaican accent. She had 3 children who did not look Chinese and who were born and raised in Harlem. My mother at that time was a single mother. She and my father had split. He was Jamaican, African Jamaican. And we grew up looking like everybody else in the neighborhood and just being kids in the neighborhood until my mother would show up and come outside and call us in for dinner or lunch or whatever. And for the people in our neighborhood who didn't know that Miss Nell was our mother, it would produce pretty much whiplash, like what's happening here? Consequently, at a very early age, my brothers and I became very, very aware of race, of racism, and of, frankly, straddling cultures and straddling races in a way that many of the folks in our neighborhood did not. We grew up in Harlem, as I said, and almost everybody in our neighborhood was either from North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. The kids, for the most part, had also been born in Harlem, but it was so interesting having this sort of chain migration where you had families of an aunt and cousins and grandmother and uncles who hailed from a same community or same town in a southern state, and here they all were living in the same building sometimes, in the same tenement, or in the same block in Harlem. And we had the 3 of us and our mother who looked like she did not belong in this neighborhood at all. What it did for us was it sensitized us in many ways to a variety of matters and issues, including something as simple as speech, something as simple as how one speaks. As I mentioned, my mother had a heavy, heavy Jamaican accent, and when she would go into patois, people would be standing right next to her and me and ask me, "Is she speaking English?" And my mother would be so insulted. Usually her response, not even an answer, her response was something like, "Jam idiot," and she'd storm off and walk away. Now, those things, for the most part, don't necessarily add up to nor constitute a very, very significant event. But I will, for the moment, just indulge me for a moment. I'm going to say the names of some other people who are Black and Asian. Otherwise, there is a fairly recently coined term, Blasian, Black Asians. Naomi Osaka, and I think his name is Rue Hachimura of the NBA, Tiger Woods, Neo, Kellis, Naomi Campbell, Tyson Beckford, mixed with African diasporic people and Asian diasporic people. And so what you have in that regard is almost another subset of people who are roaming the planet and who sometimes feel very much a part of one group and sometimes feel not so much a part of one group. I'll give you an example. I also have a documentary called Finding Samuel Lowe. The documentary chronicles my two older brothers and myself and our offspring as we searched to find my grandfather's descendants. So there came a point where we wanted to identify where in the world our grandfather could have come from. And we found through my African Jamaican second cousin, my father and he were first cousins. He said, "Oh, there are lots of Chinese Jamaicans in Toronto where my cousin lived." He said, "I'll ask them, where in China do most of them come from?" Surprisingly to me, it took from the moment he shared that bit of information, I started searching more information on these people. My cousin put me in touch with the organizers of this conference, the Toronto Hakka Conference. Hakka is a cultural minority group in China. And by that, I mean they hail from China. The genus is Han, so they are Chinese people. There are 80 million Hakka people in the world, most of them in China, but almost everybody in Jamaica who's mixed Chinese is Hakka. So these people have a conference every 4 years. My cousin contacted them. They said, "Oh, tell her to come." My family is the major owner of, as you heard in the introduction, the Africa Channel. So we took a crew along with us because we might have ended up discovering something that would be germane to shooting a documentary. From the moment we set foot in that conference, which was June of 2012, this group of people, maybe 300 or so, most of whom looked completely Chinese, did not flinch when we said we were mixed race Chinese. First time in my entire life I had encountered people who didn't laugh or think it was a joke or like, "What are you talking about?" And that's because these people knew what mixed race Chinese and Black people looked like. We gave them as many clues as we had, and ultimately what it turned out was 6 weeks later, I was in China meeting my mother's 92-year-old sister and 88-year-old brother, who my mother had never known and they had never known her. How was that possible? Because when my grandfather left China for Jamaica in 1905, he remained until 1933, at which time he had 2 loves, and he had children with those 2 loves. His family sent a full Chinese woman, sight unseen, to Jamaica to marry him, which he did, and all 8 of my grandfather's children, 3 who were mixed race by the 2 African Jamaican women, and 5 who were fully Han Chinese by the Chinese wife, all 8 of my grandfather's children were in fact born in Jamaica. Jamaican birth certificates, Jamaican citizenship, and my grandfather began taking them to China to learn more about being Chinese. And then in 1933, he left Jamaica for good because of the racism against Chinese that was existing in Jamaica. He ended up going back to China permanently. My mother was left behind, not because he didn't want to take her, but because her mother, African Jamaican, was outraged that he married a Chinese woman when she wanted to be the one. I'm saying all that to say that we found my mother's siblings, 2 of them initially, 6 weeks after I went to this conference. When I returned to Jamaica with my brothers, to China with my brothers and our other family members, we actually found to us, they were known to my aunt and uncle, 3 more siblings, adding up to 5 of my mother's siblings, ranging in age from 92 to 80 years old, all born in Jamaica, one of whom was mixed race like my mother, the 92-year-old, everyone else fully Han Chinese, and we were greeted by more than 300 of my grandfather's direct descendants, most of whom, except for 5 of them, the children of my mixed race aunt, all of the others were fully Chinese. Now, what does that mean and what does that say? That's not the usual story you hear in the United States about Black people who are mixed with other races. However, it's a very common story in Jamaica, Cuba, Trinidad and Tobago, Panama, Peru, Venezuela. We're everywhere throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, and there is a very large number of Hakka Chinese Jamaicans who live in Toronto, Canada. Just as there are a significant number in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur, where I visited, and in Hong Kong. But these are not the stories that we hear as Black people, as African Americans. What we're not hearing is that we are in places such as that. I've had people ask me, what do you think about the Chinese going into Africa? The Chinese are very much present in many of the 54 nations of Africa. The Chinese have been present in some of the 54 nations of Africa since the 1830s. This is not new. This is not new. There have been excursions around the world where the Chinese have ventured out even before Christopher Columbus into parts of what we call the New World. And so that is how and why, if you have gone to Ancestry.com or AfricanAncestry.com or 24andMe, if you've had your DNA analyzed, sometimes as a person of the African diaspora, you might find 2% Chinese, 5% Chinese. And that is because wherever the Chinese have gone, in most instances, they have been Chinese men, and as happens, they have had children with the indigenous local women. So why I am bringing all this up is because I found it so fascinating. Last week, I have a dual citizenship with the United States and with Jamaica. I found it fascinating last week when having been an executive at NBC, I think I attended maybe 10 Olympics, winter and summer. But I woke up one morning last week and the headline said, Italian fastest man in the world. And I thought, Italian? We went from my fellow Jamaican Usain Bolt being the fastest man in the world to Italian being fastest man in the world. And then I went deeper and looked and saw the picture. The Italian is in fact the fastest man in the world. His father is African American and his mother is Italian. Naomi Osaka, her mother is Japanese, her father is Haitian. The basketball teams, the track stars, the wrestlers, shot put. What we're seeing is the world is shrinking in that wherever there are people, you're going to find more people who usually have immigrated from somewhere to this place. And what we are finding, of course, is that there are so many more mixed race people occurring on a daily basis, to the fact that the fastest growing demographic in the United States racially is mixed race, because people love who they love, as they should, right? The importance of us as people of the African diaspora having a global perspective on the world becomes very, very important when, for example, again, I'll go back to the Chinese into Africa. I've been asked, how do I feel about that? What do you think about that? What do you think about the Chinese and their moving into Africa and African nations at such rates? And I say, if you remember those photos and video of Earth from outer space, you would see photos and videos of when the astronauts or the satellites were passing over Africa, that there was almost an unbelievable contrast between how not lit up Africa was versus how lit up North America, Europe were. That has everything to do with the building out of an infrastructure. And so the Belt and Road Initiative that Xi Jinping of China has pursued with great devotion and commitment has resulted in China building roads, China developing electricity throughout many of the nations in Africa, in exchange for China being allowed to develop also some of the natural resources, some of the coastal points. For example, building hotels so that tourism can thrive. Criticism has been, yeah, but the Chinese are not hiring local people. True. And that's because they have a process. They are importing Chinese workers who have been taught how to build these roads, bridges, highways, hydroelectric plants in a certain way over a certain amount of time. And usually what happens is they go in, they construct, most of them leave, some stay behind. Some do stay behind because they've learned to love the nation that they've worked in. They've learned to have relationships with the people in those nations, and they've stayed. But today, in today's China, for example, where I have taken groups of Black people with me, groups of Chinese Americans with me, because I don't know that you can get a better education than travel. So I've taken them there and shown how in every province in China, there are provincial offices to assist overseas Chinese, of which I would be considered one, to assist them in how to find their families, how to find their ancestral villages. So I showed you earlier this book, which was published by HarperCollins in 2014. This is the book I wrote called Finding Samuel Low. That was my grandfather's Western name. His Chinese name was Luo Ting Chao. When I asked HarperCollins did they intend to publish a Chinese language version, they said no. So I asked and negotiated to get the rights back. This is a copy of the first edition of Finding Samuel Low, written in Chinese and published by Shenzhen Publishing in China. Here's the second edition. Same book, different cover. They emphasized certain photos and graphs that were not emphasized the same way. One seems to be targeted more towards researchers and the other towards more casual readers. What's the point? Well, the point is that these books have been recommended by the Ministry of Education in China for reading by high school and college students. Why? Because China is broadening its definition of who is Chinese. I've been on television in China, and the show that I was on with my first cousin, Han Chinese, he speaks Mandarin, Cantonese, Hakka, and a little bit of English. I only speak English. But we appeared together on this show that was seen by 30 million Chinese on CCTV, at which point there was great excitement over someone looking like me being Chinese. I have here another book that was written at the direction of my mother's then 88-year-old brother, my Uncle Jia Wu, who I met through the research and contacting people. And in that book, he corrects a long-standing practice in China of keeping family journals, which are called jiapu. These family journals are mostly written about the men in the family. Women are usually only referred to as mother of, sister of, daughter of. But when I found my family, I asked my uncle if my mother could be included in our family's jiapu, which goes back 3,000 years to the year 1006 BC. I am in the 151st generation of the Luo clan of Lo Suihab, China. My uncle explained through an interpreter that women are not usually included in that way. Anybody who knows me knows that I don't take no easily. And so 4 months later, when my brothers and I returned to China to meet the family, they had published this book. And in this book, my mother and the women of her generation are featured as in the same manner that the men of their generation are featured. So this is a brand new approach to how China is thinking of women. And they're crediting the fact that I showed up and even asked, because women ordinarily know not to ask. I come from a different culture. I come with a different perspective, and I ask, can my mother be included in the book? And she is in fact included in the book, as am I, and all the females. I have about now maybe 45 first cousins who live in China and Australia and the UK and England and Jamaica and Canada and the United States, but we're all first cousins. And the importance of this is that what we as people of the African diaspora should know, particularly as you're going out into the world, is that, as Kelly was saying a moment ago, once you have your creative vehicle, there's so much more that can be done with it. This book presently is in development for a television series that has guaranteed distribution in China on China TV. It also will be seen here in the West. The two studios that are developing this, and I'm an executive producer, are Amazon and Legendary. Legendary you probably heard of. You might not be aware that Legendary is a Chinese studio based in Beijing. Why is all of this important? As I explained, the world is getting smaller by the moment. The stories that we have to tell of people of the African diaspora are very, very interesting globally. But if we don't travel outside of the borders of this nation, how are we to know that? I'm not saying leave the United States for good, not at all. I'm saying understand that media is media, entertainment is entertainment, great stories are great stories, and the world is very interested in knowing what we have, who are overwhelmingly the arbiters of popular culture around the world. Go to China, they won't follow you around anymore. They won't look in wonderment anymore because, oh my God, there's a Black person, because they've seen many of us. But I have stood up in China and said, if China awarded dual citizenship, as the United States does and many other nations, and everyone who was eligible for dual citizenship was in fact granted dual citizenship, there would be not 1.4 billion Chinese, there would be 2.4 billion Chinese. And their reaction is this: Chinese stand up and applaud wildly, because what they understand is it's the propagation of the civilization, it's the propagation of the culture. And on that, what I'd like to leave you with is my name is Paula Madison in the United States. My name in Ghana, which is where more than 95% of Jamaicans hail from, is Nana Akosua Barnier. I was awarded that name by the Asante Hene, the king of the Ashanti people. And in China, my name is Luo Xiaona. Luo, which is my surname, Xia, which is my generation name. All of the women in my generation have that name. And Na means beauty. I was given that name by my Chinese uncle, who told me I was beautiful. I hope you enjoyed my story. If you'd like to reach out to me, the easiest email for me is paulamadison@yahoo.com. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed my narrative. Have a good conference.
Paula, your narrative was just absolutely breathtaking. My jaw is still on the floor that you were able to find 3,000 years of your history and your story. And you're absolutely correct. Yes, the world is getting smaller. We are all much more connected than we realize, which branches off into other stories of how we can come together as a people and really grow. So thank you so much, Paula, for sharing your story. Every one of you out there, I hope you're enjoying this conference thus far. I mean, the storytelling, the passion, I'm locked in and loaded. And if you're enjoying the conference as well, please continue to share using hashtag HCF2021 and hashtag Hollywood Creative Forum. Our next featured conversation is an insightful dialogue exploring the current state of Native Americans in entertainment as measured by inclusion in the writer's room, representation on set, and how the kids current growing forward. The panel, represented by a diverse group of tribes, will provide their perspectives in navigating the industry by sharing their experiences working with networks, studios, and showrunners. Led by Director of Strategy, Native American Media Alliance, and CEO Barsit Foundation, Ian Scourton. Panelists will further unveil the lack of awareness regarding diversity within Indigenous communities and the Native American diaspora. Everyone, please help me welcome Ian Scourton for a necessary conversation on understanding the Native American voice in entertainment.
Yay, Scourton.
Thank you, Dana. I appreciate the introduction. Again, I'm Ian Scourton, Director of Strategy for the Native American Media Alliance and CEO of the Barsit Foundation. The Native American Media Alliance offers numerous programs that develop Native American writers, actors, and artists. So I want to welcome everyone to the Diversity Exclusion panel. This discussion is meant to provide genuine feedback from Native American writers, filmmakers, and actors regarding the current state of our representation in media. I want to take this time to thank Michelle Ray, the Executive Director of the Walter Cates Foundation, for continuing to push this conversation. I also want to take this time to thank some of the partners of the Hollywood Creative Forum that have shown true and genuine partnership to bolster the Native American community in this space. Comcast, NBC Universal, A&E, Charter, and Warner Media have been incredible supporters. We hope this panel will inspire support from other entities that have found partnerships with other diverse communities, but have not yet committed to ours thus far. I adamantly want to thank our panelists for being here. They are incredibly talented, represent many tribes, and have a wealth of knowledge as it pertains to the industry. So without further ado, let's get started. So I really want to jump in with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. There's been a very focused and targeted, aim, but not so much for the Native American community, and our community has been left out of a lot of the conversations. So how can we, or you as artist, writer, actor, filmmaker, keep our community in the forefront so we are noticed and continue the growth we are currently seeking? So Sienna, if you don't mind, I'd like to start off with you.
Hi, I'm Sienna. I think when we talk about this, it's about keeping ourselves present in the conversation by just keeping ourselves present and bringing in other voices that we know and trust and showing the diverse and modern reach of Native voices, because a lot of our narrative, I think, collectively in the world is that we're a people from the past. And I think it's really important that we press right now, especially when things are like getting hot, that we are a people of the present. And that's not just, it's partially through being purposeful in what we do and what we choose to say and who we bring into the conversations and stuff, but it's partially just by existing. I really, truly think that's on a level does so much just by existing in the film and television world. I had a boss at one point, and we were talking about okay, so we're thinking about a character, a not white character. Who should we have here? I was like, Native American. And I was like, Native Americans can be all kinds of things. Look at me. And he was like, because he had a perspective of Native Americans in his head. And then he kind of connected that I was Native American and this was his perspective. And then it was wrong and all these different things. And now, when I talk to him about his projects, there are Native characters just in it. I'm not even there anymore, but it's all about just I think not only bringing in other Native voices and telling our stories, but also just being physically present and saying, hello, yes. I don't know if that was a helpful answer.
It was. And, I really like your use of really these technical terms like getting hot. That really does help. It really does place us where we're at. What do you mean by that, actually? Maybe you could enlighten our audience, please.
Well, we've had 2 TV shows starring Native characters with Native writers. There's more children's TV shows coming out. I know every other TV show is starting to shape what does their Native character look like and what would that be like for their story. There's Native movies coming out, and it's just right now more than ever. I spent my entire childhood being upset that the Native American looking character in Scooby-Doo, the one where they see the aliens, was actually an alien. I remember as a kid, I never really registered why I turned off the movie before they revealed that Native American coded character was an alien. I'd always turn it off right before then. And then as an adult, I realized. And now all of a sudden it's everywhere. And there's all sorts of different types of natives I'm seeing. And they're not, mask off an alien at the end that Shaggy had a crush on. And so when I say getting hot, I just mean I, in my whole life, have never seen so many, not only different Native stories, but just Native Americans and Native stories. It's exciting. There's been Rutherford Falls. There's been Reservation Dogs. Spirit Rangers is going to come out. There's Flowers of Killing. There's a bunch of things. There's so much, and it's just it's a really exciting time. And so that's why I'm getting hot, because I feel oh, it's getting hot.
Thank you for that. Dawn, can you share maybe some ideas you think how we might be able to continue to keep our presence up front and in everyone's mind?
I wish I had a good answer for this. How do you keep present? I think, and how do you bring that to the narrative space when we're excluded and the whole monolith, I guess what I'll say is that I think you just have to, it's kind of what Sienna was speaking to a little bit, I think, in terms of like being present. And, you know, as a writer, you spend so much time like in your own space, in your own mind, and your own craft and practice. And one thing that I think that I hold as like, you know, how can I make this practice of writing, how can I sovereignize that? You know, how can I bring this in like an indigenous voice? And so when I'm with, you know, pen and paper or on my laptop, you know, I'm able to like sovereignize that space as a native creative person, a two-spirit person. And so beyond that, what happens? You have to be out in the world. And so I think that I was working with Joey Soloway on a show, and they have Topple Productions, and I had learned that they had just, it was announced anyway, that they were writing a feature film called Mother Trucker, and I knew it was going to be set in Alaska, and I was like, yo, let's talk about this movie, you know? And they were like, what? I'm like, yeah, I know that's where my people are from. So, you know, I'm Alaska Native. And then I come to find out, like, after some time, they reached out to me, and I actually came on as a co-writer for that script. And it was really interesting. And I think that initially that story had no Native presence whatsoever. So by me just kind of putting that little seed in Joey's mind of like, oh, by the way, there are Native people in this place that you're going to be talking about. And the presence is very strong. And I didn't know at the time that it was completely absent from the story, right? It's a memoir. It's a memoir about a writer who went up to Fairbanks and did the Dalton Highway with the at the time the only female road ice trucker. So I'm battling COVID right now, so I'm a little bit foggy. So if I mute myself or something, it's because I'm coughing, or if I black out for a minute, it's just I'm probably getting some tea or something. But anyway, the point of this being, I guess, is that you know, it's just you show up, right? I'm a creator. I show up and I try to tell as many people that I'm, you know, in the sphere with, in this filmmaking world, of who I am, what I want to talk about, what I represent, and hopefully that touches on something. And it does when you're around the right people. So much love and gratitude to Joey Soloway, who saw that there was a piece of the story that was missing, and not to like throw it into like this person's life experience, you know, with this memoir, but they understood that there was a greater story to the narrative that they were talking about, and they invited me in, and, you know, we crafted something I think that works.
That's you brought up some really great phrases, like you said, sovereignizing the space. I think, you know, like that's really important, and it's a great concept. Sovereignty is so important to us in terms of, you know, our nations are meant to be sovereign nations, even though we have this trust authority with the government. You know, that's a big part of who we are, our land, and keeping it our land. So that's a really cool phrase that I'm going to have to steal. So, Kara, what's some suggestions that you might have? And actually, you know what? You actually mentioned you were a part of our youth program last week, and you mentioned how you how you as an artist were able to you know, make a change. I don't want to step on the story at all, so I'll let you take it from there.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Kara Myers. I'm an actress, and I'm currently, well, not currently, but currently, I'm on Killers of the Flower Moon, which is being directed by Martin Scorsese. And what Ian's talking about is one of the issues I had with the script was the fact that my character, her alcoholism just kind of seems to stem out of nothing. And so before even like filming or anything, I asked for a meeting with Marty, and he was so sweet and kind, and he gave it to me. And I was like, I don't want this alcoholism to be nothing, because it's something that is very prevalent in our community, and I don't want it to just be another, oh, that's trauma, so I wanted it to be really actually rooted in the character. And when someone close dies to my character, I kind of wanted that to stem, the alcoholism to stem from that, because before, alcohol was just fun, but now it's a problem. But yeah, so it's nice because like even someone as big as Mr. Scorsese, he was willing to listen to me and collaborate with me, and actually listen to the fact that like, hey, alcoholism is such a problem in our community. My dad was an alcoholic. He was an abusive alcoholic. So it's like, I know that like it is a very big problem. And so it's amazing that like if you are willing to, step up and be like, hey, can we talk about this? Let's communicate. Then people are willing to listen, which is amazing. They're not just like, nope, this is how we do it, So I think that's what Ian was saying.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I'm sorry. That's really cool. I heard it that you just pulled him aside and said, I need to speak to you, and this is what we're going to do. That's the version I heard.
Oh, I actually asked for a meeting. It was before we started filming, because character-wise, we're a little like vague on our characters, because like, and so me and the sisters were like, hey, can we talk to you? And he was very, very open of like, these are your characters, you develop them, and I'll go do my thing. And we're like, okay, we got that.
That's great. No, that's good. That's I think like the youth actually asked about another actor in another film, and they were questioning why this character was treated so poorly. They were an Indigenous character, like in a non-Indigenous themed film, and it struck me that this person just didn't bother to ask, to say, hey, why is my character here? What are they doing? What is my dimension? So that's great to hear that you did that, that you asked, and and then they were receptive to it as well.
Yeah, some people aren't, but luckily I was in a good position where they were. And like, to Sienna's point, like their natives are so hot right now. Like they're like, on the actors side of it, I'm auditioning for so many like native films and native characters and stuff that are, I mean, it's amazing because I'd say 90% of them are like rooted in the native community. But then there's also people where we're just cops and we're just lawyers, and we're just like, you don't have to like make every single thing we do super Indigenous. Like you can just include us because we're just people,
Yes. And I like to make sure that we do have accurate representation. Jason here representing the male perspective. Thank you for that. What can you share? What can you share just in terms of, as an actor and as a writer, maintaining relevance for our community?
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, just even going back to everyone's points, it's good that we're in our hotness. It's not just period piece stuff. And we are just people. I've been just a cop on a show. I've been just a fireman, which is great because we are. But it's also it's good for us for our own people to see it that way too, just because of the trauma of only seeing us in the past. And we know of all the ways that Native youth experience the depression and all of that. I'm writing a play right now for a theater company where he's a PhD student who's in particle physics. We need to see that side of us because, too often high STEM field, that's not a position that in popular culture an Indigenous person would be considered for. I mean, other than, I can't remember his name now, working for NASA, last name Yazzie. But anyway, it's good for us to be in those positions. I remember, a few years ago now, I was speaking to another Indigenous actor. It was right when 12 Years a Slave came out, and he was like, when do we get our film like that? I'm like, well, yeah, like that would be great to have a a Trail of Tears film. But that shouldn't be the end of it. I mean, that would be educational for most of the country that still doesn't know that happened. But we need the present day stuff, which is why I think everyone's eating up the greatness that is the Reservation Dogs and what Sierra's done with Rutherford Falls. And it's so important and relevant for so many reasons. Not just to like take advantage of them. They're hot. There's a reason we just are. And yeah, I think I answered the question there.
You did. I understand fully. You're an attractive man. I think that's what I am gathering.
That's not what I'm saying at all.
No, I appreciate it. No, that was good. So now we talked about what we can do. I want to talk about what studios and networks can do. Like what recommendations, what would we ask? What would we, prescribe to them that they could try to do? What can they do? So what recommendations do we have? Kara, what recommendations would you have for a studio or network to continue to bolster their understanding of our community?
Well, I would say if you're going to have a Native American character, I don't know, get Native American writers. I mean, that sounds crazy. Maybe Native American actors, but I mean, especially like if you're wanting to do like a certain tribe, because there's 547 registered tribes, and we're all kind of, well, we are different, not kind of, but we are all different. So it's like if you want to, I know. I mean, I don't have COVID brain, but I feel like I do. But basically it's like if you're going to do something on Wichita, like hire Wichita actors, hire Wichita writers, or people who have, actually know their stuff. I mean, I don't know. Seems like a simple solution to me. That's kind of it.
You bring up a good point, actually. In the Asian American community, the Asian community, they're starting to actually push to make sure that if they are going to focus on a certain country, that they use a certain person from that country. Which I mean, it makes a little more sense maybe on their end. You just mentioned if you're gonna hire Wichita actors. Do you think we're like there yet, where we can tell studios to hire very specifically from those tribes?
Not necessarily, no. Because like even like on the movie, I was like, no, we're not. I think too, like part of it is just like I think the lack of representation in the media has shown our youth that this isn't a proper route for them to go, I guess. Like acting and stuff and entertainment isn't gonna pay off for them. So I'm hoping that now we can get more youth and more people will see, natives in there, because like even on Killers of the Flower Moon, I'm playing Osage. And like, as much as I wish that they could have casted an actual Osage people, we have a ton of Osage behind the camera, in front of consultants, like everywhere you turn, there's someone Osage to help you, which is amazing. And the fact that, the production's is really trying to make it as authentic as possible. But then it does become the problem of, not necessarily that there's native actors, but the native actors of the specific tribe you want, so that's definitely a thing. But like, I think that, yeah, I mean, with this production, like the Osage people are so excited to have a story told about them. So they're so open to telling us stories and sharing their traditions with us, sharing their cultures. I mean, they open their homes to us. So like, I mean, it's like, if you ask people, like especially natives, like we love telling stories. That's like our whole thing, storytelling, So it's like I feel like people will help and do whatever they can to make it as accurate as possible. I mean, I feel like the actor side might be a little bit more harder when it comes to tribe specific, but if you can find writers, might even be hard on some tribes, but I doubt it. Just look, we're there. Come on.
You make a good point. I mean, just like that, they do have to look. They have to do their due diligence. It is tough. Our population, isn't big enough to sustain. To provide, an entire production of a certain tribe. But what you said about having Osage involved, and I think the way that it was handled, by being like full transparency and full communication with the tribe. I think that's where you'll find success, right? It seems like.
Yeah.
Doan, what do you think? What can we prescribe or suggest or recommend to our student network counterparts to continue to bolster our community?
Well, it's it's having the meetings with us, right? And like I think just number one is like we're human beings and we're creative people, and I think when we layer upon like especially with Hollywood representation and lack of representation of Native people and how our voice has been really constricted, over the past 100 or so years, right? And the visibility too, like just the representation on the screen of Native people. There's a lot to kind of unpack and to reframe and to correct. But I think number one is just like, listen to us, meet us where we are, listen to what we have to say, read our stories. Don't try to there's one thing right now where I'm really, as a storyteller, I want to be able to tell a story the way that I see it working, right? And I think that sometimes there's a lot of like more circular narratives, non-linear narratives within Native storytelling. That's not the Hollywood way, right? And that's not, so I think it's just something to like, not just like meeting us where we are, but letting us tell the story how we want to tell it. That's what I would say. And I think that there's just a lot to get over. There's, gatekeepers. And so I think there's a lot of creative people in the business that are completely supportive of us, that want to see us succeed. They want to give us the seat at the table. They love our stories. They like us as people, right? But there's just, I think, a lot of gatekeeping still that that goes beyond just being a Indigenous storyteller. There's a lot of things that are restricted by those gatekeepers. And so I think that in the end, it's like I want to see more Native people rising and having positions that are able to, make those studio decisions, right? That we're not just the writer, but there's, I want like a studio exec who's like a Native person. I want people just to flood into the industry in all its forms, and just I think that's what we're going to need to see. But I think until then, it's like meet us where we are. We have a knack for storytelling. I think also it's like to be kind of pigeonholed in as like a Inupiat person or like a Native person, right? It's like, oh, well, you could maybe write for this story, but it's like I have a lot of life experience, right? I'm a human being like everybody else. And so if you're looking at a white writer who can write for another group of people or to lay in on some narrative storytelling, like I can do that too. I'm not saying that we need to be writing for, I say that, but I'm like, I don't want it to seem like we're, I don't want to go in. I think the appropriate person should be brought in, but at the same time, it's, we're curious people when we're storytellers. We're active in the world, right? We observe and we're curious. And so if you're a good storyteller, then I think you should be given the opportunity and not be beholden just because you're a Native storyteller, that somehow like you can only put the pen to paper for something that's about like, I don't know, something of the past, or just a Native character. But I feel like I'm rambling now.
That's great. I mean, it kind of goes to, even what I think Jason brought up regarding acting. We want to play normal people. We can write, quote unquote, maybe, normal stories, non-Native stories. You bring up a good way. You say, just listen to us. I think there's a lot of right now people are asking us to explain things, and they just need to listen instead of us. They're not, not asking us questions, but just listening to what we have to say. So that's great.
Right.
Jason? Oh, I'm sorry?
Well, it's just, I was going to say, to follow up on that, those are all that's exactly the point. And if you think about it, it's like, well, the white writer typically would just be like, yeah, I can write for anyone. Well, how come the opposite isn't always true? It's about the experience, what false equivalency are you showing that, like, well, you're a native writer, I'm not sure you can handle writing for, I don't know, Shameless, something like that, because there's no way to ever relate to anything, that's not of your own, but yet the white writer gets that. And, have all these things that previously said. There was, I can't remember, some comedian was like, the difference between rich and wealthy, and in this case, I think it fits, like you said, getting a studio exec and someone to stand up for us. Rich person is like, this dates the reference, but like Shaquille O'Neal, who's playing basketball. The wealthy person is the person who's paying Shaq.
Okay.
We're getting in positions right now with, we're getting more accurate representation. We're getting films produced about our people, written by our people, behind the scenes, all that. But now we need that exec who is the quote unquote wealthy person as far as the position they have. And that's when you start getting that we matter, and we're not just a flavor of the month or the year, whatever. That's where it becomes more of the well, we've been here since time immemorial. We're going to be, but within the industry, that's when that's going to change. I think.
That's a great point. I think that our community sometimes has a misunderstanding of these things in terms of the hierarchy, just in finance and things like that. The excellent Chris Rock quote to really highlight and stick the landing there, Jason.
So, it wasn't Chris Rock. Okay, it was Chris Rock. All right, there we go.
I think so. I'm pretty sure. So we don't have a chat of people who can correct us. So hopefully that is. But that sounds right to me. Sienna, what would you tell your studio and network counterparts how to best continue to bolster their understanding of our community?
Well, I think it's not only supporting like native writers, native actors, native producers, native execs, natives in all different fields who can then speak to being native and indigenous and their relationship to the different stories they're telling, and also approving different stories, because it's different when the execs and the people in positions of power are the ones greenlighting native stories. But also, Kara did something insanely brave in that you went on a Martin Scorsese film. Scorsese, you have to say it right, I guess. And you said, I have Scorsese. I'm not even joking. I have no idea how to say it. I'm sure I've said it wrong my whole life. But you went up and you said something, and you said, okay, I'm uncomfortable with this, and how can we fix this? How can we talk about this? Because that was your job, right? And so I think a lot of times when you look at people who are working in production and working in acting and art and all sorts of different things, that's your job, right? And you're trying to not only do good representation, but also keep your job, and how insanely hard that is. And for the white people who are non-native people who are in charge to be aware of themselves, to know how hard that is. Because I was in a diversity thing where they were talking to our room, and they were talking about different like strategies for talking about diversity and stuff. And they were like, it's not if something unsavory happens, it's when someone doesn't know what they're talking about, or when this happens. And those are the paths that need prepared. So preparing paths when you're telling stories, especially native stories, for when the story is not necessarily correct or right. Because as non-natives are going to mess it up, and that doesn't make you evil or bad. It makes you someone who's grown up in a system of very specific stories you've been fed, not only in television, but in your history books, in your classrooms, all this deprogramming and re-understanding things that needs to happen. And it's okay to get things wrong, but you need to be open to the fact that a lot of times, and sometimes you will be wrong, and that someone is very worried about talking to you about it, because it's hard, and making that as easy as possible for us to come up and say like, okay, I have a beef with this, or, oh, okay, I've actually experienced this, or, oh, okay, this makes me uncomfortable and I want to fix it. And then actually allowing that person to do the solutions, because it's amazing that you did that. And it's hard, and a million applauses for that. And I'm glad it turned out right, because we don't always know when we go into that, it's going to turn out well. And the person, I feel like very often is always like, oh, but it did. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't know how I don't know how this could have gone. This could have gone south really fast, and I could have still done the same thing. And I think it's fine that non-native people have incorrect ideas, as long as they're ready to change them. I remember I was working with an old boss on something, and they had a native character. And at one point he was like, oh, but Kind works because like he's like, they're stoic and they're respectful. And then he kind of looked at me and he was like, Sienna's native. Sienna's not stoic. Sienna's not respectful. She doesn't shut up. And the character grew and changed so much from there. But like, he said it and he looked at me, and like in my face, I was like, really? This is what you want to say? I didn't have to say anything at that point. But the fact that he wasn't like, no, actually, it's actually fine, I did that. He was just like, oh, okay. And so it's about making it easy to have these conversations and being aware that these conversations will happen. There's no world in which you read every history book and you watch everything and the conversation, and you never have to experience one of these conversations. It 100% will happen. And that doesn't mean you're bad. It just means that's life.
Jason, did you have something to add?
No, I would say to add on to that, and part of this conversation too about, hey, if you're not bringing us onto these projects to help tell the story accurately, when these mistakes happen, it doesn't necessarily mean whoever made the mistake is evil or was trying to make a mistake. It's like you said, it's born out of their particular, let's hope for the best here. Yeah. But they grew up under with a very specific set of experiences, and then we're trying to apply that to a native character, where if we can partner up and be like, see, if you'd have just come to us, or if you'd have come to anyone and said, hey, someone who's like this, help me, then both sides walk away happier. And I think the final product, and we know the final product will be better, but I think part of that too is just saying, like, besides not not having the fear from our side of approaching people, but so that they don't feel, I don't, just that it's okay for them to ask the questions in the first place if they're in the higher position. It doesn't make them, they're not admitting anything other than they have the same public school U.S. history classes that everyone else did, which ignored everything. That's what I got.
Thank you, Jason. That was great. That was great.
I mean, I think that it's like what you're hitting on, Jason's like, it's a continuation of American history, right? That non-Native people feel it is their right, almost their duty to, like, if they're going to include us, they get to say how it's going to look, right? Like they get to like say when we're excluded, when we're included, how that's going to look, how that's going to be portrayed, right? Like they have that power. And so it's like to reframe that, it's like, there's a lot at play when you really think about it, that there's a lot to talk about. I feel like I was going to go somewhere with this, but, I think that's just like, there's so much that, yeah, and it's crazy to me that we wouldn't be seen as just like a complex person like anybody else, right? We come with our own complexities as a person. Anyway, okay.
Well, because I think what you're talking about,
crazy talk.
Go ahead, Sienna or Kara.
Oh, I was just saying, I think what's going on there is it's not only about making sure these pathways are built for, especially in situations where the power dynamic and you're collaborating isn't necessarily even, having those avenues built, but also just getting native producers, getting native execs, fostering natives in all different parts of storytelling, not just on the screen and not just putting down the words, but the people who are saying stamp, yes, that's what we're going to do, and stamp, yes, that's what we're going to do. Like getting natives in all these different facets. I just think producers and execs do stamps apparently and point at things, but I know they do other things like budgets.
What's the stamp say?
It says greenlit.
I thought it was a literal green light they turned on, like when you got a script. It was so it's a stamp. Okay, I never
Yes,
so,
the green light
The
stamp.
stamp first.
But no, look, you guys brought up great points. Sienna, you mentioned, what Kara did. There's always this, there's this really internal discussion that natives have amongst themselves when they're on set or what have you, and they feel like sometimes they have to police the situation, and that's very uncomfortable for us when someone's saying they're part of our community when we know that probably they are not. They're not saying the right things. They're saying, like things that just don't resonate with our community. It's like sometimes you're allowed to create your own narrative, and that's allowed because people they're telling it to wouldn't know any better. And then also, Dawn, you mentioned how they tell us that, like, this is how we're gonna do it. This is how we're gonna portray you. This is what you're gonna say. This is what you're gonna do. I think that's another great point, that they're still not really listening. They still want us to explain, and they want to do it their way. So I think that's just some really great points you guys are making. So you guys have mentioned also that we're not a monolith, and I think there's a lot to be said about that. So like for instance, we are seeing a call for like general indigenous voices that can include tribes from around the world. It turns out it can be a form of like corporate box checking. Do we have our indigenous person? Yes. Okay. While positive in many ways, it minimizes the American Indian, Alaskan Native, and Native Hawaiian opportunities as other countries subsidize film and TV. So those indigenous communities benefit from that. However, here we don't have subsidies from the government for film and television. So we're at a huge disadvantage in terms of being able to produce material, have like a network, much like they have in Canada, and just other apparatus that the government funds. So what are some ways to ensure that our tribal communities here in the U.S. Don't lose our voice in this new indigenous landscape? Jason, you look the most concerned. You were frowning the hardest. Okay.
It was more of a look of I need to come up with an answer. He's probably going to call on me.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. No, I mean, yes, that's the situation here in the U.S. And I think, given our unique voices, we just need to continue to encourage as many of our communities as possible to participate and know that they could have besides viewing, but even participating as a member of the entertainment industry, because the more that you're in it, the more you can affect that change. Reaching, youth workshops, business of acting workshops. I'm on the SAG-AFTRA Native American Committee, and we've done several of these workshops in our tribal communities. I see that smirk, Ian. I know we have an interesting relationship between the Barca Foundation and the SAG-AFTRA Native American Committee. Sure. I just thought I'd acknowledge that. But I mean, these are ways to do it. Saying, look, this is an opportunity for you. You become active in it, then there's more of this change, and more of your own distinct voice has an opportunity to affect that change. Is my off-the-cuff answer since you called on me first.
That's okay. That's why I sent him a couple of days ago. But that's great. Encouraging our communities to participate is fantastic. That's the way to go. I love that answer. Kara, haven't heard from you in a while. What would you do to ensure make sure that our voice isn't like muffled or saturated by the involvement of other Indigenous communities?
Well, I think it just speaks to like what Dawn was saying earlier is like we each have our own stories. So it's like don't think that like, okay, well, just because my experience is is being told that like anyone can play it kind of thing. It's like, I feel like when it comes to, when you're talking about like Native Americans, it's a specific kind of like relationship we have with like the US and with each other and stuff like that, that we understand. And so I would hope that they would try to cast and get writers, get producers, get consultants, get actors, get like anyone and everyone they can from the community that they're trying to tell the story from, and actually listen to them and work with them, versus because I mean, the more diverse faces I see online, on screen, I'm ecstatic about. So, I mean, I love the indigenous, like worldwide indigenous movement, but also like if you're telling a story specific to Native Americans, like let's keep it Native American, maybe,
Yeah, I think there's, I think, like as these like countries that have a large indigenous presence, they acknowledge this worldwide indigenous collaboration, but they do focus on their communities. Like government subsidies do remain with those populations in those countries. So we as American Indians wouldn't be able to take advantage of those. But the reverse isn't true. Other communities can come here and take advantage of the opportunities that are here. So it just puts us at a bit of a disadvantage because we don't have the opportunity.
Come through, Biden. Come on.
Well, he just handed out $5 trillion this morning. I think we're all caught up now. Right? So,
well, just give us a little bit. Just give us a little bit so we can.
Oh, we're done.
Things,
We're done. Okay.
Exactly. Well, we'll see what it does to the inflation. Okay, let's see what that happens. Anyway, sorry, Sienna. I would like to know how you feel about this.
It's such an emotionally complicated thing because there's a lot going on there, right? Like the fact that indigenous voices have been emboldened around the world, right, does a couple of super positive things. Not only allows like people who are settlers look at other communities and be like, oh, I see what happened to indigenous populations, and then do like the vaguest amount of math and be like, wait a second, and then think about our indigenous populations and Native Americans and help them like understand and digest like how they should be acting towards that. And not only have we been like extra supported by indigenous voices, I mean, Reservation Dogs has Sterling Harjo, but it also has Taika Waititi. He's the one saying, oh, we got to tell this Native American story because he understands as an indigenous person who has seen that in their own community and seen it around the world and they've seen it in their friends and connected that this is a story to tell. It's a Native American story to tell. And so when I look at that, I am so excited. But then when I look at some of the settler or white voices or non-Native voices that then look at us and then think that they can swap us out to get what they want. And that is frustrating because it's almost like a personal absolution and a purposeful ignoring of the fact that Native Americans are the indigenous people of the Americas. And so while I see indigenous people around the world supporting each other and telling these stories, I mean, look at Reservation Dogs, super excited. And as indigenous people, we know that we need to support each other to tell our indigenous stories. I've seen casting situations where they're like, oh, it's a Native American character, but then they slip an indigenous person in from another country who's not indigenous to the Americas, but still keep that plot line. Doesn't seem like they have Native writers, and it's frustrating because those are people who've decided what our story needs to be and how it needs to be told. It was I met with a casting director, and it was very frustrating because it was like, so I met with this casting director, and they were just like, oh, like the character, I play the character how I would, and in the end, that's what you're gonna get. You're gonna get that. You're gonna get somebody like, oh, I don't feel like that's you. I feel like you're more like this, and was telling me like how I relate to my own Native history and my own relationship to the world. And I was young when that happened, and so it really threw me off and kind of like made me think I didn't know myself or I didn't know my relationship to my culture and my family and the United States, and so that really bothered me. And so I think I'm excited that indigenous people are around to lift each other up. And I'm glad that we are able to broaden this conversation. And I encourage non-natives to understand that to not then use it to lessen the fact that Native Americans are the Native people to the Americas, and that we are not interchangeable with other indigenous people. Just like I don't think any other indigenous person is interchangeable with me. I wouldn't go and I wouldn't try to make myself an Aboriginal person in Australia and casting or try to be like, oh yeah, I wouldn't do that swap out. And so I encourage non-natives to embrace that there's Indigenous people all over the world and all our different stories, and also embrace that we are all different and we have different stories to tell and we aren't interchangeable. Just like natives here aren't interchangeable, there's no absolution that happens there. And also to continue to emboldening Indigenous voices everywhere, because I think Reservation Dogs is a great example of Indigenous voices supporting Indigenous voices to tell specific Indigenous stories. And I think that is fantastic and amazing. And so I wouldn't ever want it to feel like all of a sudden we're making Indigenous people go against Indigenous people. I wouldn't want that to feel like that's the narrative that's coming out of this, because it's not. Indigenous people are supporting Indigenous people. But I feel like the more that people in this country become aware of and accepting and figuring out how to take agency over the American story and what the future of the American story looks like, the less that will be a problem.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. American Indians and Alaskan Indians have brought up this before. It does come off as maybe angry or divisive, but it's just a focus. We would like to have some focus on our community and understanding that, again, the world of Indigenous populations isn't a monolith, right? Mm-hmm. So no, that's fantastic. Doan, what would you, and you being an Alaskan Native, it's like another layer of uniqueness, we'll say, in terms of how your community developed and formed and got their recognition. So what would you recommend to maintain our voice?
I don't know exactly how to answer to this question, because I think there's a lot behind it. But kind of a short and sweet answer maybe is that I think that any way that we can decolonize the screen, I'm here for. So if that means we're supporting Indigenous people abroad, we are standing with Indigenous people here to get those stories to the screen so that people have the access to Indigenous storytelling. I'm here for it. In terms of, I hate to make it seem as though it's like a us, them, and in any kind of conversation. But yeah, I think that it's just that we do need to protect our stories. We need to protect our voices. And I think a part of what we can do is, just Indigenous people of America, we can call it America. The way we can do that is by supporting each other. And so I'm here to stand with each of you. I'm by your side. We got to get each other through this. Like, I think that's the only way to do it. And so I think it's just really supporting one another and being an ally in all forms that we can do that. And I think that's what's important. And just, let's fucking decolonize the screen. Let's do it.
I really hope they're live tweeting. Don't you have awesome hashtags? Sovereignize the space, decolonize the screen. So the live tweet must be blowing up right now with these hashtags. Okay, so anyway, so I appreciate that.
I think,
was that? Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think just another expansion on that is, and as an actor, it's hard. There's not that many roles, so I understand why, other Indigenous people or just Indigenous people, period, would take on other cultures or traditions that aren't theirs just to get the credits and get, seen and stuff like that. And it's one of those things where it's your career versus your morals kind of thing. And that was when the youth asked me about, a particular show that has a non-native actress lead, but is portraying Native, like how I feel about that. And I was like, okay, well, my feeling is I asked to never ever be submitted to that show again. So it's like I took a stand personally, which, you know, might not be great for my career, but I'm like, and, you know, but I was like, I don't want to be a part of that show because they don't align with my morals. And on top of that, I've been offered roles where I play other ethnicities. And, you know, it's like, and I ask, you know, I try not to, I'd be like, okay, well, is it part of their culture? Like, is it like, okay, this is a Mexican person and they're doing, you know, stuff that's legitimately straight Mexican. And I'm like, no, I can't play that. But if it's just like, she's a cop named, you know, Lucia, then I'm like, okay, then that's fine, you know. But it's like, if it's a matter of actual cultures, traditions, values, beliefs, and stuff like that, like I feel like you have to be able to be like, as an actor, you know, be like, no, you know, I'm leaving that space open for the proper person, kind of, you know.
I think I know you're talking about, because sorry. I was just going to add histories to cultures and practices, and knowing if that history is super important to the character, then that should be important to the I think we're talking about, sorry, Ian.
Yeah.
You already said it.
No, finish your thought, please. It sounds much better coming from you.
Oh no, just that, like,
also Kara. Oh, so I was going to compliment Kara on just the job she's doing, dancing around what the show she's talking about.
Yeah,
I'm just being politically.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes, no, you guys are very professional, very diplomatic. So I'm the one who is working on that part of his repertoire. So again, thank you for that, Kara. Sienna, thank you as well. So regarding portrayal of a community's voice, I want to discuss the representation of the Two-Spirit community. As we know, Lovecraft Country is a widely celebrated and popular show that attempted to do what the entertainment industry has been doing since its inception, and that is to portray and ultimately misinterpret other communities. In this instance, the portrayal of a Two-Spirit individual. So what can the industry do? What can the industry learn from this, and what can they do to better address this specific community? And Dawn, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate because when you have like another BIPOC creator, you want to believe that they're gonna do right by you, but we all make mistakes, we all do. And from what I know of that experience, the creator did, kind of issue an apology after being called out on it. But I think that it was unfortunate because it just felt very exploitive, and to take something that is sacred to so many people, and not even that, but just it's just even taking the sacredness out of it. Like again, like a human being, like we're walking in, not just as like a Native person, feeling the kind of oppressiveness that we feel from that, but also as a queer person. It just felt very unfortunate, and just totally a really hugely missed opportunity to put to shine light on what could have been said about this character. It was misused. It was misdirected. I don't know if they bothered to talk to a Two-Spirit person. I'm gonna guess not. Right. But, why not? Why wasn't there a conversation there in the very beginning? It should have been very apparent that that's what was needed. And, scripts go through how many rewrites, right? On a television show, there's so many rewrites. And it feels sad that like, it just wasn't caught, like that wasn't addressed. And it shouldn't have been an issue that needed to be addressed. It should have been gone and like, look, you hope as someone that is, again, like a BIPOC creator, you're like, you come knowing what other BIPOC people, like the oppressive systems which we're all under. And so it's just, it's too bad. Because now what we have living is what was caught on tape and what is streaming. That's the reality, right? The apology to me, afterwards, it's like, okay, well, at least they acknowledge that and they will learn, I think, from that experience. But the unfortunate thing is, like, what is living is what we can all go on to our, streaming devices and see that portrayal. It's ugly portrayal. It's too bad.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I'd like to, Jason, I'd like to, if you, look, it's cis males, we have our opinions, but we also have, we have an understanding of maybe of how to address certain things. Maybe you can share, your opinion on, addressing specific communities and things like this.
Well, I mean, that is, I didn't watch Lovecraft Country. And one of the things because I was getting, once I started finding out about this information, it was like, it sounds like it's something that I would like, but now that this portrayal's entered it, it definitely speaks against what the actuality or lived experience of a two-spirit person is, based again on my reading it and talking to people who watched it. And it seems like it was an easily preventable situation to be in, right? Like you said, the creator is BIPOC, so why, knowing that she probably experienced things interpreted wrongly about her own culture represented on TV or movies, how that doesn't get taken care of ahead of time. My wife's a TV writer, and for every different one of the subjects that she has to write for, there's several consultants that they talk to all the time who have specializations given life experience, whatever. I don't know. It's like I said, it's unfortunate, but it seems preventable. And that's I think the part that's the hurtful part, because it could have been, it seems like there was a way around it, and it didn't happen.
Yeah, you guys mentioned this hurtful thing. I think there's also, I think we're probably, we're fans of HBO, we're fans of J.J. Abrams, we're fans of Bad Robot. So yeah, so it's like a letdown. It's like being, seeing these icons, TV and film. It can, that adds another layer of the hurt or the letdown, as I mentioned. And Jason brought up a good point. The writer may have experienced the same thing in another level, and that's something that I think that our community still faces. Is that like other communities have dealt with this, and now I'm kind of seeing it in reverse now. It's happening to us from all kinds of non-natives, we'll say. So yeah, it's something that hopefully does change. Kara, you were giggling before. Did you have something you'd like to? You wanted to?
I think. Well, my giggling means I have thoughts. But yeah, no, honestly, I think one of the beautiful things about social media is now that, people are actually listening to it. So when people are when these studios and people screw up, we got our fans on Twitter and Instagram and everywhere being like, hey, you messed up, don't do this again, to where it's hopefully other studios and other people are listening to people and listening to us when we say, hey, this isn't accurate, this isn't right, and we're getting our allies behind us saying, hey, if this isn't how they're supposed to be portrayed, then don't portray them that way. So I'm hoping that us mobilizing and our allies mobilizing, that we can start putting more and more pressure on writers and studios and execs and whoever it needs to be put pressure on to accurately represent us, and to I mean, I feel like it's so simple to put out a call. Hey, does anyone know any two-spirited people? We would love to talk to them. And then you're like, yeah, you got writers, you got actors, you got producers, you got directors. I mean, like, there's no shortage of different type of people in our community. So it's like, just ask, and guess what? We will answer and we will talk your ear off. So it's like, to me, it is very heartbreaking, the fact that, like, how does this slip through through the cracks, when seriously, like, you just ask anyone, somebody will find something. I mean, Hollywood's not that big of a community.
That's a good point. Sienna?
And I think this speaks to what we spoke to before. On a level, I think it speaks to this idea that we as writers, artists, performers know ourselves and what we know, but also we have to know that we don't know a lot of things. And I think that's super important, to know that you don't know things. And so when you ask other people, or you keep reading, or you keep learning, or you keep being inquisitive, I think it keeps you from reaching the stage where you're like, I know the thing's going to move forward now. And that this is a never ending process. And it's fine that this is a never ending process. Most processes never end. I'll never finish doing dishes because I will continue dirtying dishes. That's just how life works. And I'm sorry for people who want to achieve full awokeness and be done. It doesn't happen. But on a level, I think it's about having these pathways built already, so that when these conversations come up, a performer or a writer, having natives around in all these different parts of production would make that easier, but also having a pathway so that someone who isn't in a position of power can call this out and not feel like it's going to turn sour. I think it's important, and it's brave to do that. But I also understand people who are native thinking about their futures and their jobs and food on the table and families and all these different things. And so I think it's about creating those pathways so that we can easily have these conversations before it gets to the screen, before you have to get called out on Twitter, before you hurt tons of people, before you hurt your own show. That's just the reality of it. And so it's hard to do that. And it's not that hard to make it an okay conversation. I got called by it was a late night show, and they had a native joke, and they wanted someone to do the voice for it. And then I read it, and my first instinct was just to say, no, and then let them, beef it on TV. But then I was like, I shouldn't do that. Like, I should have this conversation I don't want to have. So I called the lady back, and I told her, and she was a little too horrified. She was nice. She was like, oh my God, we don't have any native writers, and da-da-da. And then she was like, well, like, if we take this note, like, it'll not be on the air. And I'm like, well, so that's what's going to have to happen right now. Cause I understand your guys' turnaround and all that kind of stuff. But like, it's about making it easier for people to have those conversations, because I'm sure on a level, some people were worried about being perceived as difficult by casting, and were reached out to and just said, no. I've just said no on project before, because I'm like, I don't feel like saying all the different things that are wrong with this, because then I'll be perceived as difficult and annoying, as opposed to someone who is coming in and trying to help you. And so I think it's about making sure those pathways exist. I've said pathways like 9 times now. I will stop.
That's great. You made a really great analogy. The dirty dishes to the full wokeness. It's something you're constantly working on. I think that's a really great statement, because there is no way to just have a full understanding of everyone's feelings, backgrounds, desires, etc. So that's a really great thing to say. So before we wrap up, look, I'm super old, and I've seen interest in native film and TV come and go. With The Last Mohicans, Dance with Wolves, TNT wanted to do a whole series of several native TV movies. So I've seen the ebb, the tide, the ebb and the flow of the tide. Right now we're seeing a nice tide of content. So I'd like to know, so how can we maintain this? Like, how can, instead of it being part of a fad, how can we maintain it so that it's here to stay, that it's permanent, that people understand that our content is just as valuable, just as important, and just as marketable as everyone else's? Kara?
Yay. No, honestly, I think I know that sounds so enthusiastic. But honestly, it's just us telling good stories, us being good actors, us being, because I'm, trends come and go, but leggings stay forever. But it's like literally we're It's us being good storytellers and us just working hard. I honestly, like, I'm sure trends are going to come and go, and hopefully there's been such a push on diversity, period. Like, I think my biggest fear is that we're going to become a box to be checked kind of thing. Like, oh, we got our token native. Awesome. Who cares if they can act? Who cares if they can write? Who cares if they can produce or direct or anything? We just checked our box and move on. But I think us actually being like, no, we have our stories, we have talent, like, we're badass, like, once we get to start showing people that, I think people are going to definitely take us seriously, because, like, our content is awesome. So we're awesome, and they're going to, the world's taking notice finally, and so let's just keep, I don't want to use that analogy. That analogy is bad. Let's just keep taking the bull by the horns.
Nice. Very good. Jason, you have some, you've been around for a little while as well. Maybe you could share some insight, some insight as well.
I wouldn't call 25 around for a while, but
I'm sorry. I apologize. I know we met when you were like 10, I think, and your career just take off.
No, I mean, Kara's right. Trends are going to change. No one knows what's going to be popular, what's not. All we can do is the job we're given, and hopefully with this ebb in the tide, we'll make enough of an impression where it's not just about getting a seat at the table. It's realizing that there should always have been multiple seats at the table, and they're not just token seats. They're valuable box seats. I don't know. We just have to, the more valuable we show what, we got to take our seats and run with it, and people will see that. And I'm running out of analogies. I don't have any dirty dishes to use.
Is the clock? Is that wrong? Is it something? No, I'm kidding. Is it? I know. I get your point, though. No, you're absolutely right. Take the bull by horns. Take the seat. Take all those things. Do
dishes.
Yes, do your dishes. Dawn, do you have maybe a final comment you'd like to add as well?
Yeah, I think it's, kind of like what they were kind of speaking to, but it's like, just showing up. I think we have the stories ready to tell. So as long as, executives and people in power come to us, want to work with us, we have the stories. We're ready to tell them. And I think, it is a continuation. There are other filmmakers that came before us that really, really dealt with some shit. And so, respect to them. And there are many. I think that, there's like this article that came out about Wes Studi, recently, and I'm like, man, he deserved that honorary Oscar, right? Just for dealing with the fucking bullshit, but he's a great actor. Anyway, so many people to mention, but to really see it as a continuation, and we're ready. We're here to fill that seat, and I think that it's about also creating more space for other voices to come through. So as much as we can get through, it's like pulling as many people along with us that we can. I think that's really important. And then just a ton of respect to, organizations like NAMA and, what you're doing with LA Skins and what the Sundance Indigenous Program is doing, the Cherokee Film, the organization. And, yeah, thank you. And I mean, there's so many, and I think that, it's a culmination of all of these people that are working their fucking ass off. And some have been doing this for decades. So thank you, Ian, and to everyone else that is out there, like, fighting for us, trying to create more opportunity, more visibility, and so much respect.
Thank you, Doan, and thank you guys for sharing your time and being on the panel. Yes, please. Yeah, we're yes, please wrap it up for us.
Oh no, I wanted to answer the question too.
Okay, yes, please. Yes, we're over, but please.
Very quickly, I just think what Dawn's talking about is over years we've been building a table, and we are building a table for ourselves. I mean, look at what Sierra Analysis is doing. Look at what Solon Harjo's doing. They just pulled like 1,000 people in at once and slam, and now they're in there, and we're in here. And I think it's all about making sure that we take care of our table. Okay, that's it. Yes.
Okay, no, thank you guys. Sienna, thank you. I really appreciate all your time.
2 dinner analogies.
Yes, it is. It's time to eat. So no, I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for your time, and thank you, Walter Cates. You could see us at www.nama.media. That's where all of our programs. We have a TV Writers Lab, Feature Film Writers Lab, Writer Seminar, Animation Lab. We're going to be announcing an Unscripted workshop coming this fall. We also have a 9-month showrunner program. So we do a lot for the community. We develop a lot of artists, and we just try to make sure that we are prepared, engaged, and developed and ready to go when the opportunity arises. So I do want to thank Walter Cates and the Hollywood Creative Forum for hosting us. And we'll go ahead and give it back to Dana.
Thank you. That was an amazing conversation. Listen, all of you out there who are watching, if you didn't walk away with a tweetable, something to post, and some sort of gem, then I really don't know what to tell you. I appreciate Ian and all of our panelists for holding us accountable, for shedding a light, and it was a really insightful conversation. So thank you very, very much. All right, rounding out our day 1, and I can't believe I'm saying that because I feel like the time is absolutely flying. We have a very special treat for you. It is the Forum's inaugural film screening of Stateless, a documentary by award-winning director Michelle Stevenson. We will be showing the first 26 minutes of this powerful work, which follows the families of those affected by the Dominican Republic's 2013 legislation stripping citizenship from Dominicans of Haitian descent. The film uncovers the complex history and present-day politics of Haiti and the Dominican Republic through the grassroots electoral campaign of a young attorney named Rosa Iris. After the screening, editor-in-chief of the Haitian Times, Vanya Andre, will sit with the film's producer and director, Michelle Stevenson, to delve into why these stories should matter to everyone. Plus, following the discussion, we will have time for audience Q&A. So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier on in the day, use the Q&A function towards the bottom of your screen, and we will be pulling throughout the conversation some of those questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer as many of them as possible towards the end of that dialogue. So get your questions coming in, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present to you the Forum's inaugural film, Stateless.
Mi hijo, te quiero contar la historia de una niña que se llamaba Moraime. En una noche oscura de octubre, Moraime tuvo que esconderse. El dictador Trujillo decidió limpiar la raza y solucionar el llamado problema haitiano. Mató a muchos, a su mamá, por causa del color de su piel. tiraron su cuerpo arrastrándolo por las aguas del río Masacre. Moraimet corrió por su vida.
Y el acta, yo tengo una copia aquí.
Aquí hay una copia también.
Sí, no, pero que la original no se la vamos a dejar.
No, pero una copia de esto.
Ahí está. Ni tiene el acta actualizada que le piden, ni tiene la cédula. Sin embargo, él desde el 2013 no ha podido continuar sus estudios. Deme un permisito, joven.
Un permisito.
Gracias. Ven, pleno.
Ya, déjame.
¿Cómo está usted?
Ya, déjame.
¿Cuál es tu nombre? ¿Tú eres dominicano? ¿Cómo te llamas?
Lenor.
¿Pero dile el nombre completo? Bonnie. Dominicano, tiene su acta con una declaración, tiene sus documentos, estudió aquí.
¿Eso de Clenor?
De Clenor.
Pero Clenor no habla español.
¿Que no habla español?
O sea, no habla un español diáfano.
Hable con él.
Pero ya yo le hice la pregunta.
Es que no es migrante, él es ciudadano dominicano igual que usted y que yo. Nosotros tenemos que entender eso. Nosotros no podemos estar discriminando a nuestros mismos compatriotas.
Jamás. Y yo soy la que menos hace.
Le está llamando extranjero a un compatriota suyo. A mí me causa molestia. ¿Por qué? Porque yo estoy hablando de una persona que nació aquí. Hago la aclaración en función de que sepamos de que no estamos hablando de un nacional haitiano, que no es lo mismo el que nace en Haití que el hijo del haitiano que nace aquí.
Tú vienes armada, yo también entonces tengo que armarme, porque yo sí tengo argumentos con qué defender.
El presidente dominicano Danilo Medina y las autoridades han creado una especie de laberinto jurídico en relación a los miles de ciudadanos de procedencia haitiana que viven en su territorio. Todo ello se ha complicado aún más desde el devastador terremoto.
¿Tú sabes qué es apatridia? ¿Tú sabes qué es apatridia? La apatridia es la situación o la condición cuando una persona no tiene nacionalidad.
Eso vendría siendo como los haitianos que tienen, como por ejemplo, parte dominicana, o sea, son haitianos pero nacieron aquí, entonces por esa razón no tienen sus documentos.
Más o menos. Imagínate que tu papá y tu mamá son extranjeros, ¿verdad? No te pudieron declarar. Ahora, en el 2010, nace una nueva ley. Con esa nueva ley, quieren como que jugar a que tú no puedes adquirir la nacionalidad. Ahí entonces, tú ni puedes tener la nacionalidad del país donde naciste, pero tampoco puedes tener la nacionalidad del país de tus padres. Eso es como, son, pero no existen. Vamos.
También quiero ir. Porfis, 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 porfis.
Tú no puedes decir. Hay cosas del trabajo que tú no puedes acompañar. Y esa es una de las cosas.
Moraime corrió hacia la casa de sus vecinos. Tenía mucho miedo de esconderla. Moray me tuvo que huir.
Estamos de vuelta con A Partir de Ahora y lo hacemos con un video que realmente indignó a la sociedad dominicana. El abogado Genaro Rincón, quien fue agredido, porque el abogado Rincón se ha distinguido por defender a los grupos que la sociedad hace vulnerables.
Esa conclusión me la produjo uno de ellos. Y luego esa herida me la produjo con un pedazo de bloque. Puedo informar además también que tengo varias hematomas aquí, porque también me dieron pedrada y también me pisaron con sus zapatos y me escupieron.
Yéndome a ti, me imagino que te tocó muy cerca esta situación, porque el señor Rincón hace un trabajo muy parecido al que tú haces.
Pero es peligroso cuando vemos que esa labor se ve de cierta forma torpedeada por agresiones que comienzan verbales y ya están terminando en agresiones físicas. A eso me llama mucho la atención que se ha manifestado durante los últimos 3 años, que yo he estado de forma más activa en todo lo que es el activismo, defensa de derechos humanos, veo que sistemáticamente se está dando una agresión en redes sociales, pero no veo una respuesta del Estado. Eso es preocupante. Y se han denunciado varios hechos. Este es uno de los temas que toca como que una parte muy sensible de la población dominicana, los dominicanos de ascendencia haitiana, porque gracias a Dios Genaro sobrevivió. Pero, ¿y los demás?
Ya.
Ya de ahí para allá de ellos.
Sí.
Coño, con la facilidad que ellos entran para acá y nosotros no podemos entrar.
Son personas, esas personas que usted dice que dan con facilidad son de comercio.
Yo no puedo pasar de ahí para allá, pero ellos pueden entrar todo lo que quieran para acá. Sin presentar un pasaporte y un nada. Ustedes no han visto a nadie ahí entrar.
No, discúlpete esa palabra que tú decías. Puede ir ahí a la puerta, tú salgas, tú entras.
Él dijo que no, que yo no puedo.
No, tú hablas con los policías haitianos, te pasa, tú entras. No decir nada.
Habla con este.
Hasta la puerta tú vas a salir.
Hasta la puerta.
Tú no sabes controlar.
Los haitianos aquí matan, asaltan, picotean, porque ellos, eso es la forma de ellos hacer las cosas. Casi todos los días un dominicano o una familia dominicana y no pasa nada y el gobierno nunca dice nada. Nosotros, Movimiento Nacionalistas, tenemos varias propuestas al Congreso. La primera medida que vamos a impulsar es la construcción del muro. Ya no van a haber esos 85 puntos de frontera donde los haitianos entren, porque van a ser totalmente cerrados. Ya ese proyecto Israel se lo propuso al presidente Hipólito Mejía y él no lo hizo. No hemos tenido un gobierno serio que haya querido enfrentar el tema de la inmigración. La nación, para nosotros los dominicanos, es nuestra casa grande. Nosotros vamos a seguir luchando hasta que esto se organice.
¿Cómo estás? Bien, gracias. ¿Y tú? Creciendo. Quería venir, pero está bien. Yo necesito hacer ese mismo levantamiento, pero con información más detallada. ¿Me presta la copia del documento de la gobernación?
como 4 dedos no
Oye, ¿cuánto con nacimiento?
¿Esa es la tuya?
Yo estoy interesada en hacer este levantamiento de información. Saber cuánta gente tiene esto. Porque ustedes en 2 años hay que cambiarle esto por una cédula dominicana, naturalizarlo. Pero quedaron mucha gente que no se pudo inscribir. Entonces se tenía que saber quiénes son.
Sí, dijeron eso en la noticia, en el 7, como a las 8 de la mañana.
¿Declaraste al niño?
Yo ahora sí, yo fui ahora.
¿Y el papá del niño tiene cédula?
Mira, te va a declarar todo, madre soltera.
Mira, el problema es el siguiente, que los descendientes de migrantes que fuimos declarados con ficha o pasaporte, le están dando ahora una acta de nacimiento nueva que se llama acta transcrita. Todo el que tenga su acta vieja, por favor, plastifíquenla y háganle copia. Porque es la única prueba que usted tiene de demostrar que usted estuvo declarado ya con anterioridad a la transcripción. ¿De acuerdo? Esto es oro, mamita. Yo terminé con estos 2 barrancones, ya no me queda nadie. Entonces me queda nada más el barrancón de aquel lado. Yo nací en un campo. Éramos 5 hermanos y después nacieron otros 2 pequeños. Mi mamá es de ascendencia haitiana, de 4ª, casi 5ª generación, ¿no? Y papá, como migrante haitiano, era caficultor, se dedicaba a la recolección de café. En el batey, nosotros nos levantábamos a las 4 y media de la mañana para ir a vender comida a los trabajadores de caña. En el batey tú tienes comida segura 6 meses, cuando hay zafra. Pero los otros 6 meses tú comes una vez al día y es al final del día. Tuve que vivir eso.
Este es el monumento de la restauración del Grito de Capotillo. Aquí fue donde se libraron una de las grandes batallas que ha tenido el pueblo dominicano de establecerse como pueblo independiente y soberano. Este es un país que ha luchado muy duro para mantenerse de pie. El 7º personaje que tuve aquí en la Guerra de la Restauración, Pedro Antonio Pimentel Chamorro, fue el primer presidente constitucionalista en la transición de la Restauración. Es el abuelo de mi abuelo. Es decir, el papá de mi mamá, por eso yo soy Félix Pimentel. Yo me casé con un negro, el papá de mis hijos era negro. Tomaba mucho alcohol y en esa época yo era muy joven. Tú quieres a veces sostener eso, pero se hace insoportable. Entonces, por eso también vino nuestro divorcio. Luego entré a Derecho. Y yo soy experta en responsabilidad civil. En todas las luchas hemos estado ligados. En todas las luchas. Incluso en la del 65, que era con los gringos, los haitianos participaron. Que los haitianos y los dominicanos siempre han vivido en confraternidad, ellos en su país y nosotros en el nuestro. A excepción de las veces en que ellos han querido meterse a dominar aquí. Y han sido batallas duras y difíciles.
Nosotros acá en esta isla fueron llegando de distintas nacionalidades. Si analizamos el ADN de los dominicanos, es mayor el porcentaje de ADN africano que de otras nacionalidades. Pero lamentablemente nosotros no queremos reconocer esa parte afro que tenemos. Después de correr tanto, Noraime tuvo que descansar entre el cañaveral. Ella se durmió soñando con los cuentos que su mamá le contaba sobre su isla. Noraime se preguntó si volvería un día a ver su casa. Tú me haces a mí unas cosas y me metes en unos líos. Tú me metes en unos líos a mí terrible. Yo veo que ahí está la tipa de Bolda. ¿Cómo estás?
Tranquilito.
Y todo esto yo te estoy conociendo.
Bueno, lo que resulta es que estoy invitando a alguien, no sé. No sé si a Fidel, si a...
No sé. ¿A Sadán?
No quiero Sadán, no. Porque no me quiero ver con el problema. No me quiero ver con el problema de Sadán al final, porque
No,
se la hizo a lo oculto y al final ella se la hizo a él.
Venga la selfie. Estoy en Haití, tierra de mi padre. Primera vez en mi vida.
En Haití.
En Haití. Una amiga. Juan Teófilo y yo somos primos. Es un afectado. Al momento de hoy no ha podido resolver su situación. Él se fue para ver donde algunos familiares a Haití. Estamos en Belader ya.
Estamos en Belader, esta es la ciudad de Belader. La más joven de Haití.
Ay, pero no la encuentro. ¿Qué así?
Auto marché y así.
Oui, où t'es où?
No pas
Ok, oui. On te fait un petit marché. Na come ça, oui. Y va a llover. ¡Estoy en Haití! ¡Estoy en Haití!
Por primera vez.
¡Por primera vez! Juan Teófilo nació en República Dominicana. Tiene cédula, pasaporte, ha viajado a Alemania, ha trabajado, tenía empresa, tiene 2 hijos. Y de buenas a primeras le suspenden la vida.
Hay muchas cositas que me hacen falta porque son propias mías. Me hace falta mi hierbita de calentura, mi hoja de dragón.
Me hace falta mi oreganito. También en veces me hace falta el olor de la caña.
Ahí fue que tú comenzaste a tener problemas.
Ahí empiezan los problemas. Yo quería renovar mi pasaporte, una copia de los documentos que yo entregué en la Junta, junto a...
15 documentos.
Y...
Sonia Javier Rivera se llamaba tu mamá.
Exacto. Fallecida
¿Y
así.
qué documentos tenías de ella?
Por ahí yo tengo el acta de difunción, que los fallecimientos y la edad no concuerdan. Hay que hacer una rectificación del acta de ella.
Tu abuela tenía hasta su acta de nacimiento y todo. Tu abuela es dominicana y es la mamá de tu mamá.
Exacto.
Tu papá era el que era migrante.
Exacto.
O sea que tú por jus sanguinis eres dominicano y también por jus soli por vía de tu papá. Que tú no deberías estar en esta situación. Todas estas pruebas que tú me estás aportando, copia de tu cédula, pasaporte, documentos de tus padres, de tus hijos, todo lo que demuestra que tú has hecho toda una vida civil, como cualquier otro dominicano con tus documentos, pero no se entiende por qué la Junta suspendió, anuló tu registro. Entonces, eso es la parte más preocupante.
Porque nunca me entrevistaron, nunca me preguntaron nada. Yo nunca
¿Tú
supe
nunca has
de...
ido a
una
entrevista a inspectoría?
Nunca, nunca.
Lo primero que yo necesito es que la Junta me emita un informe de cuál es el estatus de tu caso en este momento. Eso es lo que me va a permitir a mí saber por dónde que debo accionar.
Ok.
¿Me entiendes? Entonces, con todo esto que está aquí, yo haría una instancia, solicitar una inspectoría, me den un informe de cuál es tu estatus en este momento.
Exacto.
Partiendo de ahí, yo te podría mantener informado. Mira, me dijeron que la situación es esta. Porque yo no puedo ir a hacer un procedimiento, cuando viene a ver la Junta me sale con una zancadilla de que eso no es lo que hay que hacer.
Exacto. Sí, no, yo estoy completamente
Y como
de
todo
acuerdo
esto
contigo.
es dinero y tiempo, es mejor entonces bailar al compás de ellos.
Sí, ellos ponen la música y ellos no dicen cómo bailar. Ellos saben exactamente qué están haciendo.
Un plan de desnacionalizar.
O quizá un plan de un blanqueamiento, porque el asunto lo tienen mayormente con los negros, con los blancos no lo tienen. Y si hay un blanco con problemas es porque ha estado defendiendo a los negros. República Dominicana, la tierra donde yo nací, la amo y la quiero. Pero yo no quiero seguir viviendo con corruptos, con racistas, y no voy a vivir bajo la indiferencia de que soy un extranjero cuando yo nací allí. La desgraciada y maldita resolución 12, tan maldita la resolución como los que la emitieron y los que la firmaron, me fue llevando de la opulencia a la indigencia, allí en Consuelo. Si allí en Consuelo, donde saben quién soy, saben lo que puedo hacer, de lo que puedo ser capaz, me hacen la vida imposible, imagínate tú en otro lugar. Y más viendo tú que a Genaro lo están persiguiendo, a otro lo están persiguiendo. ¿Quién me va a dar seguridad? El Estado, cuando el Estado es quien me está persiguiendo.
Tus hijos te esperan en República Dominicana, Juan Teófilo. Es tu decisión. Pero a mí me duele mucho este tipo de cosas. O sea, yo cuando fui a ver a los niños salí con
nostalgia.
Con ese dolor en el corazón.
Dicen que son la madre las que tienen conexión con los hijos de cierta manera, pero mis hijos y yo tenemos una conexión que cuando alguien le hace algo, ellos no tienen que decírmelo, yo lo sé. Yo recupero mi estatus y me servirá como un canal para yo irme a otro lugar y me llevaré a mis hijos.
Vamos a tirar para adelante. Juntos podemos.
And that was just the first 26 minutes of this moving work. I will share with you after the conversation how you can watch the piece in its entirety. Everyone, please help me give a warm welcome to the editor-in-chief of the Haitian Times, Vanya Andre, and the film's director and producer, Michelle Stevenson.
Thank you so much, Dana. It's a pleasure to see you, Michelle.
Hi, good to
Hi.
see you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, first I just want to say thank you so much for being here and, especially for taking the time to create this film and tell this story about the plight of Dominicans of Haitian descent. I think, anyone who's been paying attention to the news over the past decade will agree that there's been a lot going on in Haiti, whether it's between the earthquake, Hurricane Matthew, political scandals, the TPS fight in Haiti, that it's easy to perhaps that this story could have gotten lost between that shuffle. So, but before we move on and, we talk about what's going on in present day Dominican Republic with the situation, I'd love if you can just share with our audience just a little bit about the history and the relationship between the Dominican Republic and Haiti, especially in the 30s and 40s under the Trujillo regime. I know that was a lot.
Okay. Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, the whole history. I think maybe it might be worth sort of talking a little bit even about our common sort of history, just to ground this what's happening in the DR and Haiti from a hemispheric lens. Like, we sort of talk about Christopher Columbus arriving to America, but he never really set foot in North America, right? Although there is a day that commemorates it, but he did land on Hispaniola, on the island that currently is Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And it's where the first Europeans arrived in the Americas. It's where the first enslaved Africans arrived. It's also the first place where the genocide against indigenous peoples happened. And from there, a racial caste system was set up. Based on color and race and origin that kind of spread as far north as Canada to as far south as Argentina. So we share a common origin story that is violent, but also resilient, and where there are populations of resistance, where we see now with Rosa Iris. And when we talk about the DR and Haiti, it's interesting. If you live around the border, you don't really sense a border. You sense a culture of Dominicans and Haitians actually living together and having families together. But with the forces that exist, there is an internalizing of white supremacy. There are elites that have sought, cheap labor from the Haitian side since the 1930s and earlier, when they started the sugar plantation system. And the governments actually, in some ways, bought labor from the Haitian government. And that was sort of one of the first large waves of Haitian migration for work to labor in the plantations and sugar plantations. And part of that, and with that came extreme anti-Blackness against the darker skinned Haitian population and their descendants, which was, I'll say two things and then I'll try to kind of wrap it up, which were sort of intensified with the US occupation that happened during that time in the early 30s. And they put in place a dictator, Dictator Trujillo, who commanded the first sort of massacre, genocidal massacre against darker-skinned Haitians, as well as some darker-skinned Dominicans fell to that massacre. And that is sort of commemorated in what you have seen a glimpse of, the sort of magical realist tale of Moraime, who represents that a young girl from that time who was trying to flee the violence that's being committed against her people through the dictator. So when we talk about the tensions between the DR and Haiti, there are two tensions. One is there's always been collaboration and cultural sort of understanding and living together, but there's always been this force, this white supremacist force that instills senses of anti-Black hatred that many, the governments and powers that be have actually, put into place and put in narratives that the larger population in some ways has internalized against Haitians.
Mm-hmm. And thank you so much for tying that all in together. And I think that foundation is really important for those who are not familiar with the history of the region. And so as we've progressed throughout the years, as time goes on, we see that there are more calls for like pro Africanism, for more of an embracing of your Black heritage. And is that something that we've seen that's happened in the DR? Like, how has that kind of progressed since that time to now contemporary time DR Haiti?
So, there are a couple of things happening, and I can make that as you have seen with Gladys Feliz, who you see her a couple of times, or once or twice actually in this segment. There's a small but very powerful, moneyed, ultra-nationalist right-wing constituency that connects its white supremacist agenda to the work of Trump and those who surround him, to as far down as Brazil, Bolsonaro, and she will actually discuss the connections that they have with those constituencies. And it establishes the interconnection and the fact that this ultranationalist force is global. But they are a minority, and I think that's important to note. But they have money because there is an advantage to keeping, darker skinned people in vulnerable positions and be able to be exploited, basically, a modern form of slavery. But there is, I think, a growing sort of younger population of Dominicans and Haitians collaborating, people that I've come across, the crew that made up the production team with whom we were working, that are very sort of identify and connect with their Blackness and African heritage, but also and are inspired by Haiti's history and Haiti's culture as well. And some have actually created collaborative organizations around culture. And even this sort of was spurred on during the earthquake as well. So I like to think that force is bigger, but perhaps less moneyed, right? And I think the youth are slowly sort of shifting the narrative, but it's so deeply internalized. It's even in school, the way history is taught is problematic.
So I'm curious, in your opinion, what do you think is one of the first steps, or what should continue to be happening between the two cultures, the two countries, to encourage more of the positive, more of the understanding of the shared history, the culture, and to kind of foster that kind of community building? Because one of the things that was very striking to me while I was watching the film was a lot of that rhetoric that was coming from Gladys that was very representative and parallel of what we see, again, you mentioned here in the US with Trumpism. The idea actually of physically building a wall between these two countries, this idea of keeping foreigners out. So, I definitely think that's one track that we've seen develop, but I too have seen, the collaborative efforts between the two communities, especially with the young generation. So I'm just curious, how do we keep that going?
I'm a filmmaker, not a politician or an activist, although I like to, my strength is storytelling, and I can talk about it from that perspective. I think the idea of building these alternative narratives that people can, because I feel narrative is often at the core. It's not even a battle of facts that we're in, right? I can give you the facts, but if you don't believe what I believe, those facts mean nothing. I've been doing some work with this film with an organization called Incultured Company, and they come from a conflict resolution perspective. And what they've learned in the process, and they do conflict resolution between Dominicans and Haitians and put them all in the same room and do workshops. I think that kind of work is really significant. And there are cultural organizations, musicians, and filmmakers that are creating collaboratives. But there is something at the very core that the folks at Incultured Company talk about. And I think it's very relevant to the United States also, is you can't really start dialogue between groups without a common understanding of our history, a common understanding of how the nations were built, what were the forces at hand, what kind of institutional sort of inequities were established, in order to move forward. So we really have to start from the beginning. And what they do in Cultured Company, as an example, is go back to the history, like I was speaking about Columbus, go back to how the island was established, what were the forces at hand, and gain that greater understanding from the very beginning. So it needs to start with, I think, that history. And I would say the same thing for us here in the United States, that with educate, which is why there is such a pushback against critical race theory, right? When we talk about imagining a re-understanding of our history so we all sort of have this common base, it's threatening. It's threatening to many who feel that it threatens their power. So it's about really starting at that base. And I think there is a bubbling of that, as you said, with the youth around culture and around re-education, sort of.
No, I mean, I think everything you said is extremely powerful, especially the part about going back to the history, and then also tying in how that kind of creates stories and narratives, because we are a people that we live through storytelling from cavemen to now. So I think all of that intertwined, the education aspect of it, the understanding and acknowledgement of either whether it's shared pain, shared joy, cultures, and then putting that all in narrative form is really important. And I think we see that as a great example, specifically with the story of Rosa Iris and her cousin Juan. That was very touching, again, to see these are two people that, from my perspective, they embody that shared culture, history. Here are two people of Dominican, of Haitian descent, being able to have this bicultural life. So if you can just talk a little bit more about, the plights that she went through and trying to do this work and trying to repatriate Dominicans, patients of descent, and the challenges and maybe some of the successes that we were able to see or not see.
Well, I think the biggest challenge that Rosa Iris faced, and I don't want to give away the whole film, is, and then we see it here in the United States too, are the death threats on social media, right? As well as phone calls that she would receive, threats to her life and to her family and to her son, which led to certain really painful decisions that she had to make. I'm not going to give up the whole film. You'll have to watch it to find out sort of what happens. But I think it further emphasizes the fact that we are in a battle, whether it's on social media, whether it's on the news, whether it's, in our own neighborhood and sometimes with our own families, right? The discussions that happen around choices that need to be made. So I think that is sort of the biggest challenge that Rosa Iris faces and has faced. She herself, her documents were not in jeopardy, but she has siblings who are stateless, and her cousin Teófilo. So I think that's the biggest challenge for her. I think for Teófilo, it's existential, right? He is invisible. So I think that is the biggest pain. And in some ways, I see the biggest extreme example of anti-Black hatred is to render someone invisible, right? To render them stateless. And even when we think about in the United States and what citizenship means and how it was defined under the Constitution, directly related to race and who was a human being or not, it goes to our very humanity. And I think the state and government recognizes that citizenship is about power, and they wield it, right? They wield it around race and gender lines and migration status as well. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think if you take them to, Rosa is in a different position as a defender of human rights of her community, and Teófilo really represents the existential crises that stateless folks suffer.
Mm-hmm. And I would love maybe if you could give some details, a little bit of color on what life is like for someone in Teófilo's position in the Dominican Republic or in Haiti, moving through a society essentially being invisible. Like, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis, you imagine?
Mm-hmm. Well, just imagine, what it looks like, and it's sometimes hard to imagine because, in most of the Americas, governments recognize what is called birthright citizenship. You're born on the soil, you have a right. It doesn't matter who your parents are. You are American, right? Or you are Canadian, or even you are Haitian or Dominican. It's written in the Constitution, but it was changed as a result of this Constitutional Court decision. And what that means is someone like Teofilo cannot own a mobile phone or have a mobile phone service, cannot go to school, cannot get a job. It's almost the reverse of being undocumented because you actually are born in the country where you are sort of supposed to be sort of legitimately recognized as a citizen. And so the minute you walk out the door, you are at the mercy of the forces, of the police force, of the migration forces, of the state bureaucracies. They can do whatever they want with you. They can deport you, they can detain you, and you have no recourse. You don't even have recourse to what potentially another country for support because they don't recognize you, right? So you belong nowhere. And this is how our global sort of state apparatus is constructed. And that's why we talk about invisibility. It was the case with the Rohingya in Myanmar. There are other people who are refugees in other countries who are stateless as a result of, in some cases, standing up against the government. But in this particular case, it is a very deliberate act of anti-Black, state-sanctioned anti-Black hatred move.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm curious, you've mentioned a few other global examples of where this has happened. What usually is the way forward for these stateless people? Is it a situation where another country brings them in? Do they eventually resolve the conflict from their birth country? Because I'm thinking like what happens to a situation where that you have someone who was born and raised in Dominican Republic, speaks Spanish, and then whether they self-deport or they're forcibly brought over to Haiti, what options do they have to even start building a life for themselves?
Well, okay, there are a couple of things. So there's a big, I'll just take the DR as an example because I'm not sure what's going on. I mean, I know about the Rohingya and actually them being pushed out and being stateless, but I don't have any details about that situation. In the case of the DR, there are ways for someone who finds himself in Haiti, if they have the money and the ability to buy and purchase what they need in terms of proving their ancestry in Haiti. And sometimes it's about generations, of people who may have parents who were born in Haiti, but they may not have their documents. They may not have their birth certificate from that country. So it takes money and means to be able to even get the documents that you need. The same goes for the DR. When the Constitutional Court came with its decision where it basically made people, stateless from one day to the next. I had a birth certificate today. The Supreme Court decides, and tomorrow they decide, they make the decision today, and my birth certificate is no longer valid. So I can't get the job. I can't be recognized if I need to go to school and all of that. And they made it retroactive to my mother and my mother's mother to 1929. And so there was such a huge international uproar about that because it made 200,000 people invisible at this point, that the government put in these sort of gap measures where people who had birth certificates from the DR could find a way to register. They would be in a separate book, though, which harkens back to, Nazi measures of delineating Jews from Germans, and are not really fully recognized as citizens, but they get a paper that allows them at least to find a job and to work. And this is sort of the gray area that Rosa Iris was working in. She says, okay, you can't get full citizenship recognized to the past. Maybe one day the law will change. I think we saw a little bit of that. So keep that birth certificate, however, and make sure you keep it in case the law changes. In the meantime, let's see if you have enough papers so that I can get you something that can at least let you get a job. Right. And so those stopgap measures, and you'll see in the film, are at the mercy of the bureaucracy. Whoever I face, in front of that office who decides whether they're going to give me that paper or not, it's really arbitrary. They hold the power about whether I'm going to get it or not. Do I have enough money to pay for it? We were helping Teofilo try to get that stopgap measure papers. And every time he would go, it would be another hurdle. And we would pay for that. And then another hurdle. And then we would pay for that. And it became another hurdle until the whole team sort of gave up in the meantime. And so it's this kind of Kafkaesque bureaucratic game of power, trying to use this little law that was established because of the international outcry that isn't even like full, citizenship recognition.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that sounds like something that is beyond stressful to have to live day to day, having literally your future held in someone else's hand. And then essentially whatever you are given, you're treated like a second-class citizen in your own country. I mean, that's one thing that he mentioned all the time in the film, is that he is being treated as a foreigner within his own country. But, I'm going to switch gears just for a second and kind of play devil's advocate, because one of the points that you touched on, and it's an argument that a counter argument that you'll see very right-wing nationalist advocates say, is essentially, well, a sovereign nation should have the ability to be able to dictate what constitutes someone being a citizen or not, whether it's birthright citizenship, whether it's something else. So I'm just curious, what's your take on that? Are those arguments that you've held, that you've had people put to you or push back in your work?
Well, I mean, Gladys, who you see, sort of has her own version of what, a sovereign nation should do. But for me, that is the equivalent of a totalitarian autocratic state. This constitutional court was appointed. They're not elected, and they make a unilateral decision that goes against the Constitution and referenda that were had. Where is the due process of law, right? And I think when we fall into legalities, it sometimes masks the motivation beneath. Even as we think about the last 4 years that we spent, where the due process of law and the rights of people were being attacked consistently by people who were in power, who were using the law to legitimate, what they're doing. And right now, here in the United States, we have voting rights that are being attacked in the same way that the birthright citizenship of folks that was recognized for decades is taken away from one day to the next. Sovereignty is also about power, right? Borders are about power. And who is making the decisions, right? Who is implementing the decisions, and who is the victim and suffering of those decisions? And so, sovereignty, yes, but what about within that sovereign nation, whose voice is being heard, right? And for us, across this hemisphere, the descendants of enslaved Black people are at the center of the illegitimate moves of anti-Black hatred that have to do with maintaining a certain group in society in power.
When we had chatted earlier, you gave me a great example. I believe there was either a protest or a demonstration supporting George Floyd that took place in the DR. Could you tell the audience a little bit about that? And I think that's a great example of what you've just mentioned about this idea of anti-Blackness that's still ingrained in a lot of places.
Yeah, I think there are two sides to the coin when we talk about sort of global white supremacy and racial capitalism and how it manifests from as far, Europe, where it's, the birthplace, France and England, are the birthplace, Europe, Spain and Portugal of this racial caste system that we sort of have been this experiment here in the Americas, and of which Gladys is sort of the modern formation of it, even though for me, I see her as a Black woman, but there's a level of internalized oppression that is manifest there. And that's global, right? But there is the other side of it, which is our resistance is global. Right? Our resistance, our solidarity is global. And it's necessary for us in this narratives that we build to really push that forward. That there are thousands of Rosa Iris, thousands of Black women in the DR doing the work as they are here in the United States, as they are in Brazil, risking their lives against this white supremacist movement. An example that I give where these forces came at a head is, as we, with the murder of George Floyd, there was a global response, right? People actually reflecting in their own communities, in the UK, other places, in Canada, understanding that George Floyd is me as well, is my community too. And the same happened in the Dominican Republic. And so the leaders of the organization that Rosa Iris is a part of, led by Dominicans of Haitian descent, they put a commemoration they wanted to put a memorial to George Floyd to commemorate, his death and the violence as to be connected in solidarity. And they were arrested. Gladys's movement, her nationalist group, called the police. Police came down and arrested the leaders of that organization because to them, that monument, the wreaths, the flowers they were putting down to commemorate George Floyd was a threat to them and to their power.
Very interesting. And again, for me, it's a bit shocking, again, because the rhetoric is so similar to what we've heard here in America under Trumpism. And I can't help but think of how she would be received in this country. So it's the irony in all of that for me is really breathtaking. So I'm curious, where do things stand now in the Dominican Republic? Do you have an idea of how many Dominicans of Haitian descent have self-deported? Are there raids? I don't know if that's even the right terminology to use, but where does the ruling stand? I'm just curious in general, like if legal actions have been taken, anything of that sort.
I'm not aware of, so from what I've heard is that you have the same number of people that are still in limbo, and that it's really an arbitrary, as I explained early, process of people who are able to afford to get that sort of gap measure that the government has put forth, who can get that. Some people have, and others are just not able. They can't afford it. You have to have the money to be able to get all the documentation that is required. And sometimes people don't even have the money to take the bus that is needed, the public bus, to get to the main office in Santo Domingo. And if you watch the rest of the film, you'll see a bit of how that bureaucracy sort of rolls out. And so people are still in limbo. And from what I heard with COVID, it's just gotten worse in terms of the level of discrimination and attacks, the inability to get a vaccine if you don't have the papers as someone who is born there. It's just been exacerbated. And on top of that, this new government has decided to build a wall now between Haiti and the DR, and they've started. And so, if anything, from what I'm hearing, the situation has actually gotten worse for the communities.
I wasn't aware that they actually were moving forward with building the wall. That's disheartening. And I think something that I hope that a lot of attention is given to over the couple of months, especially where I think what we may end up seeing in the coming year or so is a crisis, happening there, but then also questions about what's happening with Haitians who have TPS here in the US. So, I hope that a lot of attention is given to this. But before we move over to the Q&A portion, I again just want to thank you for your work, for telling the story. Over this past year, there's so much that's happened between the pandemic, the racial justice protests, and I think your story and stories like this, they're so important. So that way we can all see this reflective in all types of mediums and platforms, that there are so many diverse stories from diverse people that really should be told, so we can really come to this place of understanding and reconciliation and be in a place for us to move forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, you're welcome. So we'll be taking a few questions from audiences in a few.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much, Vanya and Michelle, for that conversation. I have some questions of my own, but I'm not going to sneak them in, I promise. And thank you to all of you out there who submitted your questions in no particular order. We have some really good ones here. Sophia asked, the documentary mentioned discriminatory language through social media. Can you elaborate on how you've seen anti-Haitian rhetoric still affect Haitian people today who live on the island of Hispaniola? And I apologize, Sophia, if I misread your question, but can you elaborate on how you've seen anti-Haitian rhetoric still affect Haitian people today who live on the island of Hispaniola?
Well, they go from the day-to-day mundane microaggressions, that people also suffer here, to flat out, discrimination. Even people who are legitimate residents, the darker your skin, the more the door is closed. So in some ways, it's a mirror to how it's enacted here, except the twist is sometimes the person discriminating against you might be just about the same tone, color, skin as you in some ways. Although, there's some of that complication here in the States as well. But there is so it runs the gamut, right, in terms of how it's manifest. And on social media, it's quite ugly, the level of hatred and the spewing of violence towards specific people, as with Rosa Iris, and you'll see examples of that in the film. And you see that same thing happen here too on social media. People, receiving really terrible death threats that affect even how your day-to-day existence. So it kind of runs the gamut from microaggressions when you're walking down the street, to trying to be able to get a job, even if you are legitimately, there, and also being exploited and offered much less pay. Because part of the issue also is there is a sort of this interest to keep a certain level of society at a very low labor cost. So I make that connection again. I'm sure many of us here have gone to resorts, in the DR. That all package, really cheap resort to by the beach. I don't have to worry about anything. I'm in this sort of space and I'm enjoying myself. Well, there's a cost to that. And it has to do with the people who are stateless, who are sometimes working for very little money, cleaning the toilets, cleaning the rooms in those spaces, serving the food that allow your ticket, to the DR resort to be as cheap as it is.
And another thing about social media that always, a lot of those accounts are, there's a cartoon emoji, or it's like a close up. You can't tell who it is. It's a private account, and it makes it's so much easier for a lot of this hate to be spewed, and you never know what to take seriously and what not. So you have to move with a certain level of caution. So I can't imagine how scary that is. Art asks, what inspired you to tell this critical story?
Oh, well, that is my island. I was born in Haiti. My father is Haitian. My mother's Panamanian. So I have a very sort of ancestral sort of draw to that and to the Caribbean. And I grew up with this sort of love-hate relationship. I mean, my parents listened to merengue from the DR, Johnny Ventura and others. And I sort of grew up listening to music, dancing to that music, and with friends too who were Dominican, family who had married Dominicans, family who lived in the DR. But also I grew up hearing the history and the stories of the tension between the two islands. And so there was this love-hate relationship. And for me as a storyteller, I had just gotten off a very personal film that I had done that was about 13 years in the making, and wanted to turn to my roots in some way, back to the island. And when the decision came down in 2013, I spoke with my partner at Rada Studio, and we said, you know what, let's give it a shot and see, especially that it sort of is at the intersection of the work that we do around racial justice and storytelling and narrative building.
Thank you. Brian wants to know, what did creating this film teach you about our obstacles to overcoming nationalism and colorism? These are some heavy questions.
Yeah, that's a
The
heavy
audience
question.
can come to play today.
No. Well, I guess there are multiple levels. One is why I do what I do. Some of it is actually processing for me the actual pain that is that heritage of racial hatred, of colorism that I've seen in my family, but also how I process it is through art, right, and through storytelling. And I think that's one thing on a very individual sort of level we can process it. I think another level is what Rosa Iris is doing and how inspiring she is, and being able to, broaden the platform of the work that she and others are doing. But I do think also it's a very individual sort of, there's the collective work, but there's also the work that we need to do ourselves to undo, right? To undo, dismantle what we've internalized in the process and in our very relationships. And sometimes that's all we can control. And I think that can have a ripple effect. But the first is to really be aware of, what have I internalized? What is the baggage that I've internalized? What can I do to sort of change that in my attitudes? And there was a second part to that question.
No. It was just, what did she do about our obstacles to overcoming nationalism?
What the film? Yes. Yeah. So the nationalism part, I think part of what the film has sort of displayed. I mean, the film was also about, the inspiration that Rosa Iris is, but also an understanding that we are not going to convince ultranationalists to change their mind. That there's just no way. It is a belief system. It's a self-fulfilling, almost religious belief. So once we acknowledge that, we know that we have to build movement, right? Then that means we have to build movement. And it's the folks that we can connect to, that we talk to, they're sort of in between, not quite sure, or maybe don't know the history the way they could, or expose. That's where the work needs to lie. But what that means is that more of us, who believe in justice, right, and who have this view of things that need to change because of the inequities that exist, we have to step up as a larger group in terms of the things that we do. And stepping up is very individual, right? It's whatever you're capable of doing, but knowing that you have to be a little uncomfortable. You need to move. There has to be a level of discomfort for us to be able to make that change. And whatever you can tolerate is good.
Also, in the panel prior to the screening, I don't recall which one of our panelists said it, but there was, and I'm paraphrasing, a quote about your levels of wokeness and how it should always be evolving, wanting to learn more, wanting to grow more. And what you just said just now, that resonated with me. From Michelle, not you, Michelle, but another Michelle. How does this film and its underlying story contribute to Haiti's current dilemma, if at all?
Oh boy.
Well, and I know you mentioned politics, but I'm not going to hold you too your feet too close to the fire on this one.
Yeah, well, I think so. Here's what so for me, there were a couple of intentions when and I think it's for this film, it's more again about the imaginary. What do we imagine when we think Haiti, right? And for me, Moraime's story in this film, her search for freedom, and Teofilo's very intentional decision to be in Haiti, in the mountains of Haiti. I see him as a modern day Maroon, right? And this is an attempt in a narrative sense to see Haiti as the place of freedom, right? This is a place, whatever its difficulties, accepts our Blackness, right? And whatever its flaws, right, has paid a price for that since its independence. But that people like Teofilo move toward, not as refugees, but as Maroons in search of freedom from oppression, right? And so for me, it's seeing the symbolism of what Haiti means and trying to shift that. And what I may also, her whole story is about getting to the other side of the island, because that is where she will be safe as a Black woman, right? And so it's that little sort of drop in the sea to help us shift the notion of how we see Haiti. I mean, some people have written about Haiti being Wakanda, right? If we think about it, I mean, if we think about it in a certain way, in the sense of the resilience, the resistance, the innovation, the creativity that exists in spite of being, pushed on a daily basis because of our global system. And so I think from that sense, rather than be specific about the actual political situation that's going on now and what this story contributes, I think from a narrative and symbolic of space, we're trying to push how we see Haiti.
How do we support Haitians and Dominicans in addressing these social issues regarding statelessness? What can we do?
There is a GoFundMe campaign that is happening now for the Legal Defense Fund in the Dominican Republic. There are attorneys working there to defend the rights of Dominicans of Haitian descent to get their papers, as well as for Haitian migrants. And I don't know, I can certainly somehow maybe provide the link to that. And In Culture Company, that organization I was talking about, is sort of coordinating and spearheading that initiative. So that's sort of a direct thing that can be done. But I think also just from individual, social friend sort of space, we can talk about it, right? To our friends and our family members, discuss the connections between what's going on there and what's going on here, but also, eventually sort of talk about the plight there. And I know that we're thinking about seeing if we can organize some kind of screening on Capitol Hill as well, to kind of influence the Foreign Relations Committee on thinking about ways of addressing this situation.
What type of feedback, if any, have you received from those that were a part of the documentary since its release?
Oh,
Now that they're seeing themselves on the big screen.
Well, I mean, Rosa Iris is really sort of blown away by it, as is her son. Her son has watched it, and he's very, very excited when he sees. And he, at the end of one screening we had, he went to his mother and explained how proud he was of her. So that's been great. And Rosa has actually been touring with the film as well. And doing Q&As around the situation with the film. I recently heard from Gladys as well, who said that my entire film is full of lies. So in spite of the fact that, she says what she says in her film, but she's saying that all of the other narrative is not the truth according to her, which is why I sort of talk about I talked earlier about the fact that you're not going to change people's minds. So that has been her reaction. But overall, I think there's been, interestingly, a lot of people have also come to us about, we have sort of these post-screening discussions, and people from the Caribbean and the diaspora find that they have more tools also to kind of talk about colorism in their communities as well. And we've had, Teofilo, unfortunately, I don't think he has seen the film yet. He's been ill. He had 2 strokes over the last 2 years. And we've also sort of put some funds together to kind of help him with getting medicine, as well as, trying to get him some papers as well. But yeah, so that's been sort of the overall reaction, and the organization that Rosa Iris is a part of, called Reconocido. We're trying to organize a screening in the DR that will sort of help their movement.
Thank you so very much. And you also kind of answered my last question. I was going to ask, not that you share what happens in the rest of the film, because we, of course, will have the link for everyone to be able to watch it in its entirety. But I kind of wanted to know, like, where are they now? So you touched upon it. We're not going to give too much away. Thank you so very much, Vanya, for a compelling interview, and Michelle for sharing your work with us here today, and for taking time to answer audience's questions and to sit with us. We appreciate you both so very, very much. And we are also going to put up on the screen the link where each of you who are watching today, you can see the rest of the film or watch it with your friends and loved ones, the film in its entirety. And we will also, I believe, have this information on the Walter Cates Foundation website as well. Thank you so much, Vanya and Michelle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay, I told you today was going to be an amazing day. We covered a lot. Just so many gems, insightful questions, answers, comments, and just thought starters. We will have the clips from today on the site in the near future, as well as share across social media, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Tomorrow, we have more engaging dialogue, taking you through the content pipeline, the process of getting the green light, and dive inside the writer's room. We will also have a special Cates Talk with CEO of Revolt TV, who's one of the youngest CEOs in our industry, Detavio Samuels, and we have so much more. You definitely want to stick around. Please be sure to follow us on social media and to continue to check back in on the Walter Cates site, where we will post content from today. Use hashtag HCF2021 or hashtag Hollywood Creative Forum. And yes, you can still register for the networking event that is happening tomorrow. That will be a separate link. It's definitely a separate link, and we will have breakout sessions. It'll be led by DMA and just so much more, some really exciting information. And I'm going to share like a little 2022 preview. So you'll definitely want to stick around for day 2. All right. Have a beautiful evening, everyone. Thank you so very much. I'm Dana Blair, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
all have a story to tell. Beautiful, complex, fascinating stories. Told through a lens of varying shades and experiences. That's the power of art imitating life. It cannot be defined or confined to one space. So let your creativity soar. Fill the page, press record, and dare to captivate the masses with your authentic voice. We all have a story to tell. What's yours?
As well as please follow us on social media for more updates, as well as additional social clips and opportunities there. We will see you in Los Angeles, April 2022 at the London Hotel. We will be back in real life, able to connect, hug, laugh in person, and of course, cheers, because I'm sure that many of you are going to leverage the things you learned the past 2 days to do some really awesome things. And now, for those of you who are registered for the networking event, it is now time to log off. I know you're going to miss my face. Take a coffee or water break and then click onto your separate Zoom link for the networking event that's going to start to take place. And if I look at my clock, in just a few minutes. So wherever you may be, thank you so very much. Have a beautiful day, evening, afternoon, and we will see you again very shortly. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.